Thank you for joining us in this beautiful venue, in this beautiful morning, and with a very welcoming, very friendly audience. My name is Andrea. I'm from Technology Enriched Learning Initiative. I'm an instructional designer and also the little recommender for this event. So this event is initiated by one amazing teacher that I believe a lot of us look up to and aspire to become maybe just a fraction of him, Professor Rick Lofczewski from Faculty of Law. So although Rick initiated the event, he decided to take the back seat and just enjoy the show. So we have our wonderful faculty host, Faculty of Law, and on behalf of the faculty, please join me to welcome Ms. Alice Lee, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, to give us a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Actually, it's exactly how I would like to open my very brief introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and students, good morning and welcome to the law faculty in case this is your first time. So this is our very lovely conference room. So on behalf of the law faculty, my name is Alice Lee, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and I would like to welcome you to this very meaningful symposium because it is on feedback for learning. And it is originally actually initiated by my colleague and my mentor, Professor Rick Lofczewski, right here. So we will all be sharing our experiences from different perspectives, how feedback could be effective, could be useful in the whole learning process. So we have all, colleagues from different faculties and also guests today. So, my role actually is to welcome you to the Faculty of Law, whereas we have Ricky welcoming you on behalf of Telly, I believe, so who is also the co-organizer. May I welcome Ricky, please.
Thank you, Alice. Actually, it shouldn't be me here to say these kind of things because it's unfortunate that my boss, Professor Ian Holliday, the Vice President and Pro-Vice Chancellor Teaching and Learning, is out of town today. So you have to bear with me for speaking on his behalf for a couple of minutes. So speaking of Ian, I'm sure you have noticed his earlier email sent to everyone on campus about QAC's request for us to give feedback according to the grade descriptors that we use in our courses, which is very, very important because in this era of using outcome-based learning approach, students really kind of have a contract between you and the students as to their expectations, what they want to get or what they are supposed to take away from the course. And in order for them to gauge whether they're really getting those outcomes, your feedback is extremely important to them. So this is something that I want to reiterate based on Ian's message. And of course, the second thing I want to say is, thanks the Faculty of Law, Alice and her team, and David, and my colleague Andrea, and my colleagues in Telly for making this event possibility and a reality today. And of course, everyone has to thank Rick here for initiating this and backing us up, because Rick has become like a brand today. And with people like him initiating these kind of things, it's the best possible job for us as a supportive unit to take on. Right? So let me try to do a bit of advertisement here. For those of you who have some ideas that you want to bring together a community to share your experiences or just brainstorm a little bit, let us know and we'll be more than happy to support you to make an event possible. So speaking of that, I really want to say a few more words about the community concept. Because from teaching and learning perspective, I think things like this today is the best possible kind of job that we can be participating, because we are having a very, very good community of enthusiastic teachers, students who care about the notion of feedback today, for example. So I hope we can do more of these kind of things and grow this community bigger, do more of this kind of events, and of course I have to wait for Rick's further instructions as to what will be the next symposium. But for those of you who have some ideas, you can also come to us or come to Rick or Alice or other usual suspects in this room to organize some good events under the banner of teaching and learning. Before I close, let me say also a few more words about what my personal agenda is, or I would say my self-defined learning outcomes for today's event. Okay? I like to use 3 A words. The first A word is actionable. I hope to learn from you guys feedback that is actionable. Because I just did my PRD, and my reviewer said, okay, Ricky, you know what? You have to get more international exposure. That's the feedback, right? But to me, that's not actionable. How can I do that? So when we give feedback to our students, we should also think maybe a little bit deeper as to how we give actionable feedback. So this is the first learning outcome I hope to learn from you guys. The second A word is accountable. Accountable. Some kind of feedback that we can measure. Right? Students can measure, you can measure. You can really gauge with respect to the learning outcomes whether those feedback are really effective. And the final word is advancement. Right? The feedback can actually take the learning, feedback for learning today, right? Take the learning to the next level. Right? So one way to gauge whether we have advancement is you can examine the feedback themselves, whether the feedback you give to the same course or same cohort of students will actually be more and more sophisticated. Right? Students are picking up your concepts from the early part of the course, and towards the end of the course, they need you to give really deep feedback. Right? Things like that. So these are my 3 learning outcomes. And thank you all for joining the event today. I'm sure you'll learn a lot from these speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricky, and thank you, Alice, for the warm welcome and the quick preview of our event today. I'm sure everyone's got a rundown at your hand, and every presenter today, we have a full-packed list of presentations, and there are 2 forms of presentation. One is oral presentations with all the presenters here, and the other form is in the middle. We have a few quick 1-minute presentation from a few other colleagues. And very fortunately, all of the presenters are here at this venue with us, so if you do pick up something from their video presentation, you can always have a chat with them during coffee break. So without further ado, let's get the program started, and with the most exciting part of this is when we will hear feedback from our student about our feedback to them. And who is better to chair this session than Professor David Carless? So please join me and welcome Professor Carless and our wonderful student panel.
Good morning, everybody. When Rick and I were talking about the event, we figured that feedback is for students. Feedback is to help students move forward in their learning strategies, their development. So what better way to start the event is to have a student panel. So perhaps I'd like to ask first the students to just introduce themselves briefly, their program and their year.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Connie, and I'm from Science and Education.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Ram Noor. I'm from Faculty of Engineering. I'm majoring in computer science. I'm a year 2 student.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Lillian. Currently, I'm doing a Master of Education here, and then my specialism is Psychological Study in Education, and I'm a year 1 student.
I'm going to ask the panel 3 questions. First one, something positive, something they like about feedback, a positive experience. Secondly, something maybe not so positive, something a bit more critical about the way feedback is managed. And then thirdly, I'm going to build on Ricky's idea of action, and I'm going to ask them to give an example of an action they've taken in response to feedback. Okay, so the first question, can you tell us something positive about a feedback experience, some feedback you valued? And the feedback could come from a teacher, it could come from a classmate, it could come from a family member, it could come from somebody else. And I think that's an important theme today, that feedback is not just something that teachers do, it can be generated in different ways. So a positive experience, anybody like to start?
Yeah, so in my year 1, I had the course Everyday Computing and Internet under Professor Ricky. So in that, we were supposed to write a short essay. And I think for feedback, it should not only come after you have submitted your assessment, it should also be there during the time you work for that assessment. For example, I approached Professor Ricky, and he was quite gracious to actually extend his support. He pushed me forward to research about the topic which I was working on. It was quite a technical topic, but during the process, I learned a lot. And I think just knowing that I had that support system out there, that I could actually approach someone who knew about the topic in depth, was actually helpful for me. And I believe the key takeaway message from all this is that even during the process where a student is working on a certain assessment, give him feedback, and just know that that process is also important, and to provide feedback at that point of time is also critical.
Okay, so personally, I think that feedback is very important because it actually provides a basis for us to improve. And the beauty of going to the university is not just about gaining knowledge, but it is also about gaining some useful feedback that can allow us to improve and go beyond our own limits. And I actually have several experiences of really good feedback practices in the university, in which they all share some common characteristics. So I would say it usually is well planned in a way that it contains several stages. So firstly, it is about a proposal writing or a draft making. And then after we make the draft or making the proposal, then the teacher is going to give us some feedback based on our performance on the draft or proposal. And then after that, it is followed by a second stage, which is a consultation. So it is a consultation which lasts for about 10 minutes for each student, so that we can actually communicate about how we understand the feedback, and also we can check if we have understood the feedback correctly. Then the final stage is that we are going to make a final assessment task. And then after that, we can get a grade. So actually, I think this kind of design is really good because it contains several stages, and at each stage, we can actually receive feedback and improve based on the feedback. And then finally, we can actually add on the feedback and internalize the feedback into a final product, which we can see if the feedback is really well integrated into our task.
So from my experience of positive feedback, I would just want to mention about the learning in class. So basically for a master course, you usually have a lot of discussion-based learning activities. The first one that I have would be define a topic or define a keyword, for example, like creativity. So teacher actually guide me, what do you think about creativity? We start from this very basic question. It's a kind of inquiry-based learning. And then students give their opinions on this topic. And then we construct our own knowledge from our peers. And finally, the teacher gives us the constructive feedback and very timely feedback on what does it mean by creativity. I think like what Connie said, feedback should have, built on a kind of structure so that it can be constructive. And then the teacher also need to give us some guidance on how, like maybe they wrap up the things so we have more understanding on the meaning of word, but just not based on our own perspective. So this is why the feedback is useful for me.
Okay, thanks very much. Second question. We know that feedback is not that easy to manage. We know that we can't always satisfy students with feedback processes. So the second question is, could you give any example or sharing of any frustration or idea about how feedback could be made more effective?
Actually, I think that all feedback are beneficial, but then the extent of benefit is different. Actually, I have come across cases in which is about the overuse of symbols. So, like after we have submitted essays or report, it is quite common that teacher would give symbols like underlining, question mark, exclamation mark. But then, actually, this kind of symbol is quite vague in the way that we cannot actually understand what is the problem or what is the meaning behind the symbol. A good example is that underline. So actually, I remember that there was once that I received the essay back, and then I saw some underlining. So I thought that this was the part that I did not do as good, and there is some problem with it. Then I actually went to the teacher, and then the teacher said that it is actually, he's highlighting it because it is a good point. So actually, this kind of conflicts always exists. So I think that some just symbols without a good definition could sometimes create confusions for the students. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe I'd like to build on that. If you're giving feedback to students, try to be detailed because we've worked quite hard for that specific assessment. So we'd like to know more about your thoughts and how we are good and bad at the same time, right? So with that said, another thing, for example, in computer science, we often have like online quizzes. And in these quizzes, we have, say, there are multiple choices. And if we get a particular question wrong, maybe one thing that can be done is you provide a short feedback, instant feedback as to why that question was done wrong. And a short explanation about the question and maybe a link or something using which I can probably learn more about that topic. Because just knowing that we got it wrong doesn't actually help in the learning process. So I think that's something which can be actually implemented in real life, where if you have like an online assessment, you can actually provide instant feedback.
I would like to add more things about the symbols that the teacher used. It's very funny that I think all of you here actually experienced that from your teachers. For me, I'm doing those psychological courses. So let's take a look on the basic thing is the APA style. You usually have all those things that you make want, especially when you are fresh to those style, and then the teacher actually just underline it. So you know you got one, but as long as the publications becomes more complex, and then you have different types of context that you need to cite. Actually, the teacher will not teach you so deep on that. You have to search it by yourself. So from this point of view, when the teacher just underlined it, and then you need to search, but you are not actually teach the process of searching. So from this point of view, I think if teacher can give us feedback, not just underline, will be better. Like what maybe Blom said, more explanation or a run-up feedback would be a better way.
Thanks. The third and final question is to do with actions. We often talk about closing feedback loops. In other words, there's a comment, which is a stimulus, and then there is some kind of reaction, and then hopefully learners or students are taking some action on the feedback in order to improve their work or their learning strategies or their conceptions of learning. So my question is, can you give an example of some kind of feedback process where you've taken some kind of action and maybe how it's improved your learning over the longer term? And that's probably the hardest question. That's why they're pausing a little bit. But it's the proof of the pudding in feedback, isn't it? You get the stimulus or the comment, and can you actually move it forward?
So again, in one of my courses, we had to submit short essays, which was kind of like a reflective note after every lecture. So initially, I faced some trouble. I had trouble in writing and fitting, so it was just 140 words, and we had to describe how we learned in like that particular lecture, and we had to submit it after every lecture. So, but the thing is, during that process, as I said, the professor was quite approachable. He responded to my emails, so that's one thing. If a professor responds to your emails, you actually know what he's expecting, and you learn in the process. So it's like it's very important to have open communication. But with that said, this was one process in which, in the initial few reflective notes, I didn't fare that well. But during the process, I learned how to summarize my thoughts in those 140 words. And I was able to do this because I discussed this with my other classmates about how they were doing this. And in fact, it was like a mutually beneficial discussion where we both understood how to actually put in our thoughts in those short paragraphs. And secondly, I talked to the professor and asked specifically about how we should focus on and what we should focus on. So I believe this was one of the productive things I had regarding to feedback.
I would say more on the feedback should be student-oriented or student-centered. So actually the students, not students, should be teachers to give student-centered feedback. What does I mean by student-oriented? Is it they based on the student current abilities and based on their own perceptions, and after that you help them to reach the gap. To help them to reach the one that you want them to learn. So from this point of view, teacher actually assess the student abilities first, and then they provide the feedback, not direct them to the exact answers, but they try to help them to build their knowledge bit by bit and reach the final answer. But the final answer is still their own way of learning.
I also like the way that the teacher do not provide a direct answer, but instead ask some thought-provoking questions that actually trigger me to think further. Because like if it is just directly answer my question, actually the learning is very limited. But instead, if it is raised as a question, actually I will spend time thinking about it, and ultimately I actually can think out of my box and go beyond my limits. And I think concerning the feedback that are useful, actually there are two types of feedbacks that can promote really good learning. The first one is very detail specific, like or regarding to the some of the details, like for example, citation. So there was once that I did not cite the literatures properly, and my professor told me about the correct citation way. So I remember that, and I continue to use that. But this kind of feedback is deep in my head, though it is direct, but it is useful. But the other one is about what I talked before, which is trigger my thinking. So they ask thought-provoking questions in which I think further, and this kind of thinking is not just restricted to one assessment task, but it actually provide me or train me the skill that actually I can use it in the future, and this can be generalized or applicable in my future studies as well. Yes.
Thanks very much. I think the students have set the scene very well for today's event. We can see that feedback is a complex communication process, and we can see that there are possible misinterpretations or misunderstandings between the teacher viewpoint and the student viewpoint, and we can see the elements trying to converge on action. So I thank the students very much for joining us, and I think they've done a great job in setting the scene today. Thank you.
Thank you.
As it happens, I'm the first speaker, so we continue seamlessly on. I'm very pleased today that a number of my colleagues from the Faculty of Education are joining the event. We've been running a teaching development grant project on innovative approaches to feedback, so 4 of us, including myself, are going to be sharing some of our insights into feedback processes. In the last event that Rick arranged in April, which was on authentic assessment, we got a good reception on Twitter, so I'll be live tweeting the event using the hashtag HongKongUFeedback, and I hope Phil Smyth and a few others and at HongKongU Online will join in the conversation. So my short contribution, and fortunately it follows a little bit from what some of the students were saying, is try to bring in some more dialogue into feedback processes. There is a danger sometimes that feedback can end up being a little bit one way, and if we can make it in some practical and user-friendly way a little bit more dialogic, then perhaps we can eliminate some of those misunderstandings that the students meant to. The way Rick asked us to frame our contribution is to start off with a problem that we're addressing. So the problem I'm trying to address is how can we avoid the phenomenon that with the end of semester assignment, something that comes in just at the end of the course and then it takes you a few weeks to mark, how can you make that a bit more of a dialogic processes? Because the students will always tell us that anything that comes right at the end, after the module is finished, is extremely difficult for them to action. And I really love Ricky's theme of actionable feedback, because I think it underpins what we're trying to talk about today to a large extent. So the technique I'm sharing can be used with any kind of extended piece of writing, whether it's a laboratory report, a business report, an essay, a simulation, any kind of extended piece of writing. And it's trying to tackle the phenomenon that the input will come too late for students to use, too late for student to action. And there's a danger with any written comment, as Connie exemplified, that it can easily be misunderstood because it's just a one-way transmission of information. So the technique is a simple one, and you know the students always have a cover sheet with their name and their course, and the technique invites them to state on the cover sheet what kind of feedback they would most like to receive, what kind of feedback they're interested in. So they could say, I would like to receive feedback on the reference list and the citations. I would like to receive feedback on the organization. I would like to receive feedback on the points I've made on page 3. I would like to receive feedback on the way I understood the theories that were underpinning this assignment. So it's bringing a little bit of student voice into the process. And I'm going to share 3 variations, but this is the simplest variation, that the students just complete that prompt. Now, the reason I think this is a little bit powerful is that it's bringing some student agency into the process. There's a danger that students are quite passively positioned in terms of feedback. They've done the essay, and they're just waiting for the teacher to give a judgment or a verdict. This gets them to think about how they've performed, and it gets them to think about how they've been improved. So it's quite a simple strategy, but I think in order to complete that prompt, the student is going to have to go through a little bit of thinking about what they've done in their assignment. The second variation, I think, is a little bit more interesting and a little bit richer, and it's asking them to expand to 3 questions in a kind of reflective kind of way. So they reflect on the strengths, point 1, what they think they've done well in the assignment. Then number 2, Notice the way I phrased it. I didn't put the weaknesses, but that's what I mean. The aspects for development are, we found actually that students didn't like to say the weaknesses are ... They're afraid you'll give them a grade C if they set out the weaknesses. So the aspects for development, what they could have done a little bit better. And then the third one, it's the same thing again, what kind of feedback they would like to receive. Now we've found that this helps us target our comments a little bit better. It doesn't mean we only respond to the issue they say they would like feedback on, but that kind of guides us a little bit, that we get a little bit of insight into the thinking of the students. The third variation, and again it's back to Ricky's opening point about actionable feedback. This is a kind of little variation when we could ask the students to state what previous feedback they're using. I think we all know as teachers that one of our frustrations is we sometimes feel that we're telling students over and over again similar things. So this is trying to get the students to think about the totality of feedback they've received from previous teachers, feedback they've received from previous modules, and how they can actually use that feedback to strengthen this assignment. So I think, again, that's stimulating a useful cognitive process in the students of what am I trying to improve, what kind of comments have I had, how can I move forward in my work. So those are the three variations. Just my last slide is some of the possible challenges that occur. Sometimes students are not sure what to ask about or what kind of feedback they want, what kind of feedback they need. And again, I think we can draw on what Ricky and Ian have been talking about in terms of grade descriptors, criteria, rubrics. What are the performance indicators for the piece of work they're doing? What is the quality that they're trying to exhibit? And I think the students often don't exactly know what quality work looks like and how it's assembled. So what is a good essay? What is a good conclusion to an essay? What is a deep analysis of a point? So if we can try to tease out the characteristics of good academic writing at university level and go through a process of demystifying the rubrics and the criteria, I think that can help students to know what to ask about, but I think it can also help them to access feedback as well. The second point, and I already alluded to that a little bit before, was that sometimes students were a bit hesitant to say, the weaknesses of my work are blah, 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 or the areas for development are blah, blah. But I think we can draw an interesting insight from research. When we do research, we nearly always have a section in our article that says the limitations. We sometimes have a subsection of limitations in research. So actually, as academics, it's important that we acknowledge the limitations of what we've done. And I think students can also build on that, because actually it's better to acknowledge the limitations yourself than wait for somebody else, the reviewer or the teacher, to identify them. And that brings me to my final point. I think sometimes as teachers we could model feedback processes for students. By modeling, I believe we can do the kind of thing that Ricky was doing in his opening remarks when he was talking about his own recent experience of feedback. So I think as teachers, we could model how we are exposed to peer review. We have peer review of teaching, we have peer review of research, we have quality assurance, quality enhancement, and in most of those processes, we are required to take action on feedback. When the QAC gave us that report, they require us to report back to them every 1 year, every 3 years, what you've done. When your faculty undergoes a faculty review, you're required to explain what actions you've taken. So I think if we were to expose students to the ubiquity of feedback in higher education, The fact that we are continually seeking feedback, responding to feedback, making sense of feedback, and using feedback, that would be a useful sharing to do. And it will also put us on the same wavelength as the students, I think. Both the students and ourselves need to use feedback in order to move forward. That's my little sharing, and I now open it to questions and comments. Yeah, Rick. Rick can't restrain himself. He wants to get into the action.
Can't talk about feedback. Could you explain, David, a little more about when the students are expected to take the action that you describe? I'm asking because you said this is typically an end of term written assignment, and that means that it would be receiving a grade with your comments, I presume, at some point or other. But do the students take this kind of action, particularly in the first example you gave, do they take the action before they've seen any feedback from you so that they engage with it immediately, or they await your feedback, then they participate in it, then you look at it again, you look at their feedback or their participation?
Yeah, let me just elaborate. So for example, say a student in year 2, say year 2, semester 1 is writing, for example, an essay. I would want them to state at the beginning of their essay what feedback they had in year 1 and how they are using that feedback in the current assignment. So if it was a semester 1, year 1, they couldn't do that. They would only be able to do the requesting the feedback part. But yeah, this is for later kind of years for them to try to think about all the feedback comments they've had and how they can use them in moving forward. Any other comments or questions for me? Yeah.
Hello, David.
Yeah.
I want to ask, would they be assessed on this kind of reflection? Because just like Ricky has mentioned, if I'm doing my PhD and my boss asks me, do I have a weakness? I would say no, because I would not try to give him a place to pin me down, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm trying to think from the perspective of the students.
Thanks. That's a very good question. We sometimes worry that students won't do anything unless there are marks attached to it. I'm not sure if we should think that, but I think we do sometimes worry about that. So sometimes I might give them 5% of the overall grade for doing that. Sometimes I also get them to do a self-evaluation checklist. So sometimes I ask them to interpret the criteria or rubric in their own words, and then their summary of the rubric is on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side, they do a self-evaluation of how they've performed against the rubric. So I don't think you could give them like 1% of the mark for doing that. To me, if you're going to give like a percentage of the mark, it needs to be something a bit more substantial. So if it was a reflection, something like that of, say, 100 words, and maybe it involves some kind of self-evaluation. But yeah, this issue of whether you need to give students a bit of an incentive to do something is a live issue. And yeah, generally I would sort of elaborate variation 2 and give them 5% of the mark for doing it, because that seems to make them a bit more serious and a bit more motivated. But thanks for that question. Any other question or comment? Yeah.
All students are asked to provide feedback regarding the course. So maybe there could be an extra item on feedback on the feedback system. So maybe it would help the faculty to learn a little bit how does the student think about that particular courses on their feedback system. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a slightly different topic, what I'm talking to, but I'm sure Ricky will pass that on to Ian and they will think about it. And yeah, do students have too many of those feedback evaluations to fill in? And you must fill in, I don't know how many in the course of your learning career, but yeah, that's a slightly other issue. But I think my job is done, so I'll hand over.
Thank you, Professor Carless, for this very actionable feedback sharing. And our next presenter also brings to us a very actionable sharing. And in fact, I believe her feedback is towards an assessment that most of our students will go through in their university life. So please join me and welcome Dr. Nicole Pan from the Common Core.
Hello. Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Pan from the Common Core. And today I would like to share an experience I have teaching. I used to teach that course from the engineering department. It's a Common Core course, but it's under the humanities AOI. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about, basically, the course is project-based. 50% of the grade is based on the final project. And I try to, because it's project-based, not every course is project-based. I try to draw some common framework that could be hopefully useful and applicable to other teachers in different courses. Okay, so just a little bit of background. The virtual reality course was offered by the engineering department. Students come to our course with no prior computer science, engineering, or design backgrounds, but they are asked at the end of the course to produce a 3D model or a VR product. And then, like I mentioned, 50% of the grade is based on a project, so there's a lot at stake for them. And the important thing is that as teachers, we want them to succeed, not fail. And this is why it's very important for us to provide continuous feedback, so to make sure that they would, at the end, produce something that they will also feel proud of. And I agree with David that I really do think that feedback is about communication between the student and the teacher. And it's as much a feedback for students as feedback for teachers as well. So in our course, most of the feedbacks are given during the tutorial. We have every week 1 hour tutorial with a group of 20 students, and the students are divided into 2 project groups. So of course, this is only conceptual. But the main idea behind that is that you want to take that big, daunting task and break it down into manageable tasks, so students feel that they can actually handle it and be able to succeed. So basically, we have this design and make cycle, which you can fill in those labels yourself depending on the task that you created or the coursework that you created for the students. So the first stage is idea generation. Second, gather information, and then drafting. And the third stage is design and testing, and finally, you make the final product. So I'm gonna take you through each stage one by one. So the first stage is idea generation. So what happens is that we ask the students a task. They have to produce a mind map or a project proposal. So just like what Connie just mentioned, there are different stages where the teacher takes the students through. So in order to do that, we need to discuss with the students about the ideas, the concepts, and the issues that were brought up during the lectures. So we find that it's a very good way to connect the lecture to the assessment. And oftentimes, because students have to come up with an idea, with a topic or a focus, then we find them more willing to engage with that kind of discussion. And then also, what I often do with students is that I encourage them to share their personal stories, in relation to the topics or issues they are interested, just to give them a bit more engagement and ownership during the process. So this is a project plan template that we give students. And there's, as you can see, a lot of questions are here to prompt them to think about what they really want to achieve. And so, as one of the students mentioned, you ask this kind of critical, in-depth questions to get them to think about something a bit more in-depth. And as you can see, you can read it. We ask them, what is the purpose of your project, and what are your target audiences, which is not entirely unlike what David was just saying, the process of doing research and publishing paper and thinking about the readership. Okay, then the second stage is after they pick the topic, they decide, then they would have to gather more information so that they can enrich and produce the final content. And so usually what we do is that we ask them to draft a storyline or produce a storyboard, a flow chart if they're designing a VR game. So what you have here is an example of a storyboard that one of our students produced. He, obviously, he's very artistic and talented, and he's a student from architecture. But we were just really impressed with the effort that he put into doing this storyboard. So with this type of work, then teachers can give really immediate and appropriate feedback based on the kind of storyboards or mind map that they produce. So I made a copy for you just for you to enjoy it. I really think that it's really, really beautiful. Okay, this is another type of feedback that one of our students also mentioned. It's a very direct and detailed feedback. So students in our course has to produce 3D models, and in the process of drawing those models, we actually have domain experts from the department to give very specific feedback. So for example, in this picture that I show, the reviewer actually say, try this tool on SketchUp on these parts. So it's very specific, but it's very useful for the students, especially when it comes to problems with technicality. So like, you know, for writing, it's citation. For drawing, it would be how to use a particular tool to make that graph look realistic. Okay, and then towards almost the final stages, they have to come up with a more substantial design and testing their models. So, so the whole feedback, as you can see, it's actually part of the assessment, and it's not something that's separate. Students naturally need the feedback to move on in order to produce something at the end. So in this design and test process, the teacher would, based on the design that they come up with, to provide feedback. For example, does this make sense? Are there too many scenes that you're creating? Or are there enough interactive elements that you put into the design? Okay, so this is a design sample from one of our students' project work. We actually give them a lot of room for creativity. So they come up with this idea of talking about the artistic design, and then they say homemade scenes. I really like the word homemade, because they, like, for them, it's really like they're making something at home, right? As they are building this project. And then they also think about the user experience. So for example, they want to create 12 scenes with seamless transition. And then my feedback to them would be like, honey, that's too much for you to handle within a month's time. you want to cut it down at least half. So that's the kind of thing that you can give them. And then, of course, then in the process, you can also praise them. I think feedback to students in particular really has to be like nurturing rather than hostile or making them feel anxious. And that's like, I think that's, to me, it's a growth model rather than a competitive model. Okay, so final stages is when they, voila, come up with the final product. And then they have to do a lot of debugging, they have to do modification. And in that process, I think the key point is that you are walking along with the students throughout the entire process, and you are building rapport and relationship with the student. And so that's actually satisfying for both the student and the teacher. So this is just two really beautiful 3D model that they produce, just to show you how intricate and complicated the work can be. And notice these are the students who has no particular design backgrounds. And this is, for this one, it's called the Hourglass of Memory Eraser. Students are thinking about the issue of how everything gets erased very quickly in Hong Kong. This is an interior space that designed a replica of Guaming Street in the old Kowloon Wall City, which is gone now. It only exists in our memory. But the students did a lot of research about period-specific interior elements and design. So as you can see, there's the mahjong table and, so yeah, that's it. This is my sharing, and I hope it's useful for you. Thank you. So do you, yes, great.
I really like your point about saying that feedback should nurture students. And if you allow me to do that, I kind of like to conceptualize your mechanism as a co-creation of the artifact between the students.
You said it better than I did. Basically, that's it.
Yeah, so the conceptualization is very useful as a methodology for teacher to take feedback as really, building on David's earlier remarks about communication. But it's more than that. It's actually communication towards co-creation. But what I'm worrying about is how does this scale? Because it seems to me that you are giving this kind of feedback to individual students.
No, it's to a whole group.
The whole group?
Yeah, a project group, which usually is between like 6 to 10 students.
So how is the workload? I'm sorry to ask this kind of pragmatic question.
No, this is very practical, and this is why I'm saying that I do want to draw some common framework and the idea behind that, but I don't think my particular case would be applicable to everyone, and that's my limitation because we are very fortunate. Our course is actually supported by a lot of TAs, and especially teaching assistants who has special knowledge in like graphic design. And so they'll be, for example, at least be able to help with the technical aspect of the course. And I think increasingly we have more and more design and make-based courses, which is a bit unusual, of course, for traditional universities like us. But I really do think that we need to pay attention to that trend, and I think, to me, it's really about coming up with resources to support this type of course and learning. And I think Telly is doing a great job, and then people, and Case, they have that digital literacy lab. I really do think that we are heading towards a really correct direction. But I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, I mean, in order for it to be scalable, I really do think that the university needs to put in a lot more resources and mechanism so that they can support this type of learning. Yeah. Thank you. Hi. Gavin, do you have a question for me? No, just kidding. Sorry. Well, because you're sort of like a designer, right? You design how trees can be placed in cities.
One thing I want to ask about is when you're giving the feedback on something, on the storyboard or whatever it is in the process, in my experience, although I might want the whole tutorial group to hear what I'm saying to each individual student.
Right.
But it ends up being a little bit difficult because the students are nervous about that. You know, they just want to talk one-to-one in case they've got something wrong and then get shown up.
Right.
You know, and I mean, how do you find the same thing? And is one way? I mean, one way out of that is just to make them present it to the whole group.
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's something that I didn't mention, is that usually after the students come up with a more substantial kind of draft or design, I would ask them to present that to others in the tutorial group, and then would actually ask them to comment on each other's work. And usually students are able to come up with really very positive and constructive comments that, you know, students can, you know, their fellow students can take away and modify their design. So yeah, I actually did that too. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Should I leave more time for the next speaker? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole, for this sharing of co-constructing using feedback. Thank you. And our next presenter will use another mechanism to co-construct feedback, to co-construct learning with feedback. And this time it's not just feedback for practice, but also feedback for reflection. Let's welcome Dr. Kennedy Chen from Faculty of Education.
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to share my feedback practice and also my reflection. So I'm Kennedy Chen from the Faculty of Education. So let me start by showing you several statements. Do you recognize these statements? Do you know what these statements are about? They are the educational aims of Hong Kong U undergraduate program. I have been asking myself how I can foster student critical self-reflection and how I can enhance their awareness of their own strengths and weaknesses. And here comes the feedback strategy that I have tried out in my own classroom, including those at the undergraduate level as well as postgraduate level. The strategy is called Dialogic Use of Exit Slip. And I am going to present my presentations according to 3 parts. So the first part, I will talk about the goal of my feedback strategy. I will also talk about the design of the feedback, including the rationale as well as the feedback process. Finally, I will end with a critical reflection of this strategy. First, why this feedback strategy? I think all of you would agree with me, reflection is a very important outcome because this is an important skill which allows us to learn from our own experience. Particularly in the field of initial teacher education, reflective practice is taught as something very important because this helps students to formulate their own educational philosophy, which allows them to put their ideas into their own classroom practice. However, my experience has told me that a lot of my pre-service teachers' reflections is very descriptive, it lacked depth of thought, and it's also very superficial. So it's inspired me to really think about how I can help my students. And so the goal of this feedback strategy is to enhance pre-service teachers' ability to reflect meaningfully from their experience. So the design of the feedback. So this shows the rationales. So I want to make it clear that my conceptions of feedback is that this is a process which the learner makes sense of information from various sources so that they can use it to enhance their work and their learning strategy. So my role in this process is not to just give feedback, but to foster their thinking and sense-making of the feedback. So I will try to design a learning environment in which they receive timely feedback, they are exposed to multiple voices, and they can compare and contrast their work with that of the others and their peer through in-class dialogue. I think this is also very important for them to self-evaluate their own learning progress in the whole process. And here comes the details of the feedback process. So this is actually an assignment of an undergraduate course, so which is 6 credits, and it comprised 20% of the overall grade. So after each sessions, each student complete an individual 300-word reflection, which I call exit slip. And then they upload their exit slips to the Moodle, and I will be giving individual written feedback on each student reflections. So normally I'm teaching 20 to 30 students. And then I will select one exemplar, so one piece of excellent reflections for sharing and further discussion in class in the next sessions, the first 15 minutes. So this shows you the template of the exit slip. So I am asking them to talk about what they learned and also the insight that they can develop after attending my sessions. And I also purposely ask them to ask any question they still have in their minds. And this shows you how I make use of the reflections in the next sessions. So in the next sessions, the first 15 minutes, I usually share one exemplary reflection that I actually got from the students. And then I will stimulate further dialogue and discussions. And of course, I will also address some of the burning questions that students have. So the verbal and written feedback is guided by the 5R framework of reflectivity, which operationalizes 5 levels of reflections. Low level of reflections involves simply recounting, reporting, retelling something with minimal transformation, whereas high level of reflections displays high level of abstract thinking, generalizing own personal insight. So this is not the end of the feedback process. So at the end of the 12 sessions, so I ask students to select 3 best pieces of reflection and reflect on their own learning progress. So this shows you the template I used. So basically, they have to copy and paste and reread their own reflection produced throughout the whole course. They also need to self-evaluate their ability to reflect critically based on the 5 levels of reflection framework. They also need to illustrate how they progress in their ability to reflect critically throughout the course. So to summarize, I really hope that my students can get individual personalized feedback. More importantly, I hope that they can be exposed to multiple voices and exemplars through in-class dialogue. I also want students to self-evaluate their learning progress, and hopefully this strategy can foster interplay between my feedback, my written feedback, my in-class dialogic feedback, and also peers and self and learner own internal feedback. So let me show you some reflection. And I think I need to select some of my student voices about this strategy. So this is the settle comment. So surprisingly, students were very positive about this strategy despite the heavy workload. So just like some of these representative comments, so they really enjoy the in-class discussions, And also, the exit slip helped them to reflect on their own learning. And they started to recognize the importance of being a reflective teacher. So they are able to be exposed to multiple viewpoints and were challenged to think further. Of course, I also have my own critical reflection. Is this strategy sustainable? So now the class size is 50, 100. Is it sustainable for me? So is this strategy applicable to other subject discipline? And of course, I hope to stimulate all of you to think about this question. And this year, I'm trying to make use of the Moodle forum to do something very similar of what I did for this strategy. And this is a variation of it. And I'm thinking how I can scaffold students to give peer feedback based on the 5 levels of reflectivity framework. And hopefully, I can let them have more agency in giving and receiving feedback. And I hope you enjoy this sharing and share with me your experience. If you really want to try this strategy by emailing me, I would be very happy. Thank you very much.
Hey, hello. Thank you, Kennedy. Yes. I also would like to steal Ricky's question about scalability, because for common core courses, we may have 120 students. Some of my courses may have more than 300 students. And if you're talking about individualized feedback for every week's lecture, so I wonder if you have any ideas on this.
Okay, thank you very much for these very practical questions. I've also been thinking about these questions. So this year, I'm trying to upload the reflection on Moodle so that the peer can be a source of feedback. But of course, you have to really scaffold peers to give constructive feedback. And I think as teachers, we also need to give some feedback anyway. So maybe we can start by selecting 10 reflections for giving individualized feedback. In the next sessions, we give feedback to another 10 students. So that is, maybe that can work, I'm not sure. So yes, please. Thank you.
I guess my question's related. I wonder how long it took you to write all the personalized feedback, number one. And secondly, whether you feel you could do the same thing, just giving whole class feedback, very quickly read through all of the slips, and then at the start of the next class, just summarize a few of the key points, whether that would actually save some time.
How many hours did I use to mark the exit slips? Actually, I quite enjoy reading their reflection because it sort of stimulates my further thinking of my own sessions. So, and they stimulate me to think a little bit more, maybe about 2 hours. But I think it's quite fair because you're teaching a class and the students are attending 2-hour sessions, and I think marking is part of teacher's job. That is what I think. And really, it seems to be dialoguing with your students, and I think that gives you some kind of satisfaction too. That what I feel. Any more questions? If no, then thank you very much, and please share with me your experience if you are going to try out this strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kennedy, for another very practical use of feedback practice. And as Kennedy mentioned, that this feedback is a process, and our next presenter brings this process to, as David introduced, a loop. So now let's welcome Dr. Charlene Ho from Faculty of Medicine to share her feedback practice.
Thank you. This is actually, thank you very much, Andrea, in placing our lectures this way, or presentations really, because actually now that, since I've heard Kennedy's practice, it may somehow, hopefully will segue very nicely. Loop learning, we've all talked about today, thinking about feedback, which now I like to try to think about feed forward, right? Here, whoops. I need to point it this way. Yes, here, thank you. I wanted to bring a little bit of some of our student panels, and in addition to this, I couldn't lure is probably not the right word, but lure some of the medical students over from the Faculty of Medicine to give some feedback about their assessments and evaluations. So I was at a lecture a couple days ago with a colleague, Julie Chen, who's on a TDG, who's doing this multi-year assessment on whether or not the types of support needed to enhance learning and teaching in our programs over there. We have 5 programs of study in the Faculty of Medicine. Not only do we have the medical students, the MBBS, but also pharmacy, Chinese medicine, biomedical sciences is where I'm housed, and also nursing. Okay, so our cohort in medicine, as you know, is the largest on campus, over 200 every year. And here are some of the feedback that we get from them. And as you can see, the first one says, a second-year female student says, "We never knew what we did wrong when our score is low. We learned nothing from the exams." It's harsh, but a second comment was, "The results from last year were released this January, and it was so close to the exam, it's too late to start working harder." So, and the last one from a Chinese medicine student was saying, "I just wish they provide continuous assessment and feedback. I think we lack tutors in the school." So these recurring themes of what we are hearing from students about not getting timely feedback or not understanding what the teachers want when they assess. So I was thinking about then a loop, right? Because we know what a loop is, it's a connection. And when we think about assessment, evaluation, assessment is trying to, they're not the same, they are separate. So assessment is trying to determine if the process of them understanding the learning outcomes is being met. And evaluating is whether or not that process of the guiding of when they're actually doing it is actually being, to what degree are they actually achieving that. However, I feel like it's not really one or the other for the students, because what we need to do is concentrate on that middle bit of whether or not their assessment and their evaluation is actually coming together, because what we want them to do is feed forward the learning outcomes that we are trying to implement. So my methodology really is simple. We have group projects, and I'm a new appointment academic staff, so I actually am tasked with a lot of first and second years. So my classes are usually over 100, 200 or so. So I've got a lot of students' eyes looking at me all the time. So what I've done actually is try to implement some group work. Okay, in terms of like some of our colleagues are like, how long does it take you to actually give feedback? Because giving feedback to over 100 to 200 students is very time consuming. And what I've done then is put them into groups, and then taking that learning objective for this group assignment, then having them meet, having them think about brainstorming what kind of ideas they want to do and try to achieve these learning objectives. Then they meet me. So usually then I'll probably be meeting maybe about 50 groups or so, between 30 to 50. But these meetings are short, 15 minutes or so, just to make sure that they're on track, okay? And then that group will then submit a draft. This draft will then be put out into peer review. But each individual student will need to upload a draft, okay? So this draft then, it's 3 times or 4 times, depending on the size of the group, of the same thing. And then that goes into a peer review process. And then each student will then be giving a evaluation or some feedback according to the rubrics that are already posted. So then they look at whether or not the message was conveyed effectively. Is it clear? Is it has evidence-based results shown in the particular project? Then each of these students will then get that overall feedback and then take that information and then revise if necessary or whatnot according to what they've received. And then at that point, we'll then submit the final product. So all in all, not only will they be getting feedback from me, but they'll also be getting feedback from their peers. And believe it or not, this whole process is actually done in Moodle. So there is a way to do it. Okay, but these are some exemplars of what I wanted to show you of this particular feedback loop. So the Moodle screenshot is there on the right there for you guys. But here we've got in green, one of the student peer feedbacks describes the topic, how scientists manage to cure many diseases. The central content is clear. I can also see the great effort. However, from my point of view, you could try to do da-da-da-da, okay? And another feedback from another student on the same product shows, according to me, your work has met most of the intended learning outcomes. You've taken into consideration different perspectives. Good quality should include more information on the ethical issues. For example, adding pictures, written words, and if it's possible, give a detailed example on one of the applications. Okay, so these two pieces of feedback from their peers were then taken back, and this is after they've submitted their final, and then they were also asked to write a reflection, and a reflection from one of the group members showed working in groups, I felt we were able to exchange ideas. Another challenge was the accuracy. However, it helped highlight the importance of peer review, and I can relate why it was such a necessary step in publishing anything that was accurate and precise. So that shows to me that hopefully learning from other peers, being able for them to actually view the piece of work as a teacher might, be able to make them self-reflect, well, I should change this, or is this message being conveyed properly? Things of self-reflection, which I'm hoping is a feed-forward type of learning. So therefore, I was thinking in terms of learning outcomes for this activity, it's reinforced multiple times by 3 different sources, plus myself, and then also continuously. It's not just at the very end, after they've submitted a final product. And hopefully also during this process, there was an increased self-assessment to align what they were doing to the learning outcomes for that particular project. And like I said, believe it or not, this is actually done in Moodle. So Moodle can be our friends. Okay? It's under the workshop, if you look under activities. So it's under workshop for your adding activities. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Charlene. That's a very interesting presentation. I was intrigued by your second slide and the 3 items that you identified as problematic in feedback. Can you go to that? I photographed it, but it was you put your finger on, I think, really some critical issues, and you seem to have addressed at least one of them in your presentation. Are you able to, and this is a big challenge, are you able to address or suggest ways that some of these can be resolved at scale, given your own teaching obligation, which involves large group teaching? My teaching involves large group teaching as well, and I often wonder about that. When students, for instance, receive a summative score on an exam, we never know what we did wrong. Is there a way to resolve that? And then the second item, timing. We received the results so late. What good was it? And also, on the same topic, does it apply to anything going forward? If students receive feedback on something that they'll never have to do again, they know they'll never have to do anything like it again, why would they bother with reading the feedback? And then that begs the question, should teachers be putting time into the feedback when it's clear that students won't be reading it anyway? And then continuous assessment, which is I think what you address very well in your description. Any insights on the other 2, or this is just what you wanted to put up as food for thought? Or?
It's food for thought, really, and I know, Faculty of Medicine have always been trying to tackle these issues because first-year students just coming in not only is university students, but also in a very rigorous and demanding curriculum of medical school, are inundated with so much information. And when we test them, unfortunately, we do have a formative exam in December, and then they're summative in June. So we are trying to tackle ways of uploading some feedback after their December, and then we've had 2 teacher-student sessions where they can ask specific questions also, but it's difficult, and I don't know how it would be to solve this problem in the short time. I think it's an ongoing process. So.
You use examinations in the medical school, do you? You
Yes.
have final examinations.
Yes.
Am I also correct in understanding that in the Faculty of Education, there are no classification of degrees? It's pass-fail? Is that correct? Yes, I thought so. I don't know if everyone knows that, but that's rather, I think, unique in the University of Hong Kong.
It is.
And I think there are benefits to it. I wonder whether, with examinations, and I offer this idea to everyone here, with end of semester examinations, however much weight it carries, whether it's possible for students to participate in that process immediately after the event itself, immediately after the examination, by having a large group session with the teacher to take up the exam before it's been graded. Take it up with en masse with student dialogue and participation and construction, so that they think about it on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than putting it out of their head, because at that moment their heads are clear, their minds are clear on what they've just been writing, reasonably clear.
No, I think that's a great idea. We would need to collaborate more so, because in these exams, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the curriculum, but we've got blocks. So there's the cardiopulmonary block, or there's the head and neck block, or the endocrine system block, and each blocks are taught by the instructors of their expertise in that field. So to arrange something of that sort of forum would require some logistics. However, that is something to think about, and we can possibly bring to our dean, or somehow someone can help us out and do something like that. So I'm sure it'd be beneficial, and I'm sure the students would really like that, instead of getting feedback months later and don't understand why there's. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlene, for the sharing of a very effective loop of feedback. And I heard this word scalable coming up from 3 of the presentations already, and I hope at least in the next, in the upcoming ones, there are a few practices that can really address this issue at a scalable manner. And another purpose of scheduling the video presentation next is that we don't want to put any pressure on any presenter to be the person before the coffee break. So now let's go to the video presentations, and make sure you take some quick notes, because it's just 1 minute each person, and you can feel free to talk to them after this session.
Okay, hi, my name is Lowana Phillips. I work for the Centre for Applied English Studies, the CAES, in the Faculty of Arts. I'm going to talk to you about the buddy system I use in my undergrad and postgrad teaching. You can use for feedback. It's like scuba diving. You need a buddy when you scuba dive. So I say to my students, your buddy can help you in different ways through your course. They can give you ongoing feedback. They can give you feedback on specific assignments. They can give you help at the end of each class. They can give you help when it's preparing for assessments. So the buddy system allows for ongoing, developing peer feedback. Get your students into buddies at the beginning of the first class. They choose their own buddy, and then they can move to sit with their buddy during different class assignments. So the buddy system allows for support in different ways, and one way can be the feedback system. So good luck with your buddy system. Okay, that's it.
Similar to many of you, a feedback problem I face is the difficulty in providing meaningful feedback when teaching large classes with a few hundred students. So one method I use to try and address this issue is to assign an essay early in the semester that mimics an essay assignment that the students will receive later in the semester. This first essay, however, is graded solely pass-fail. While reviewing these initial essays, they are categorized for issues. Later in class, I then share anonymous excerpts of student essays and discuss in detail what was good and what could have been improved in their essays. For this first assignment, many students have similar issues in their writing, so the feedback is generally applicable to most students. After implementing the feedback mechanism I just explained, the need for individual meetings to discuss this assignment actually decreased, and the quality of subsequent assignments improved. Additionally, I received really positive student comments that this type of feedback was helpful, and actually one of the few times students had received feedback while at HKU, which I think is an area we can all improve on.
This is Alice Lee from the Law Faculty, together with my students Cedric Cheung and Charlotte Cheung, sharing a student-driven feedback experience. We call it a green tutorial because we go out to the green courtyard, and it's student-driven because students get to choose the time and place of the tutorial. It addresses some common problems with feedback.
Indeed, we receive feedback after the exam. We are told what went wrong, but there is nothing we can do about it. It's the end. We seldom have the chance to discuss it with each other or with the teacher. Unilateral feedback is the norm and no one enjoys it.
The green tutorial is a kind of formative feedback. It's in November when we start our revision. It's a combination of feedback and learning. We submit our work in advance and meet with our tutor and classmates in the courtyard, where we identify common mistakes and discuss how to improve. It's interactive and we ask follow-up questions. It's fun and we enjoy it.
Hi, this is William.
This is Rachel.
We are now in Rio de Janeiro.
We are from Faculty of Science.
Co-teaching SCNC 1111. Okay, we have made use a number of different ways to give feedback to our students. The first practice we adopt is to use the Moodle quiz, because Moodle quiz can give students the instant and automated feedback. Secondly, grade marks on Turnitin has been a very efficient tool to deliver feedback to our students.
After students' presentations, we give on-the-spot comments and suggestions.
Fourthly, we organize 4 hours of consultation every week to tackle individual questions from students. Fifthly, our students carried out their group project in phases so that we can give them individualized and instant feedback in between. Finally, we are proud to have recruited some very talented senior undergraduate students as our senior tutors. They may have experienced similar problems before and therefore can provide feedback very promptly to our current students.
In medicine, competency assessment and feedback for students are largely based on the teacher's own professional experience and practice. On the contrary, feedback from the patient is authentic and genuine. To incorporate patients' perspectives in student feedback, we introduced the Parent Satisfaction Questionnaire in the clinical competency test for final year medical students in the Paediatric Clerkship. The student task is to take a medical history from the parent, and afterwards the parent is invited to evaluate the students on their communication skills, thoroughness and attitude, and whether the parent is happy to have the student as the child's pediatrician in the future. There's no correlation between the PSQ scores and the examiner scores. In fact, they are discordant in 8.3% of students, suggesting that in some situations, doctors and parents assess students from different perspectives. We return the parents' comments to the students who find them very helpful. It's important to realize that our education assessment system, geared by academics, may not necessarily reflect the perspectives of the wide variety of stakeholders whom our graduates are serving in the future. Implementing authentic feedback in undergraduate education is an area that is worth further research.
I'm a teacher educator, and my students are pre- and in-service teachers. One of the challenges that I see is to engage them in a process of peer feedback, feeling that it's all right to not just give one another praises, but also to tell one another what was not so good and what could be improved, and of course to feel comfortable in doing so. As a teacher-educator, I'm also hoping to help them acquire what quality feedback is like. This is how I conceptualize good feedback. To model this and involve my students in doing the same, I create Moodle discussion tasks where they learn dialogic feedback, to take part in the dialogue with their peers and me, and as this evolves, to give positive and encouraging feedback in a natural manner. For example, to learn to use hedging and other techniques when commenting on a controversial point, and to be constructive by making suggestions for improvement using. Through this, they get to experience the kiss, kick, kiss approach in giving feedback, the joy of receiving ongoing, timely feedback, and to see the power of good feedback in bringing out the best in themselves. With this, they internalize what makes good feedback. It has in fact been very interesting to see how quickly they pick up the language and the techniques through teacher modeling. For me, that's feedback for Feedforward.
Since there is a little delay in the live streaming session, so while we wait for the second venue to catch up, please join me and give another big round to all the video presenters for their presentations and their very well-planned video. Okay, we're back. Okay, so since I mentioned that we don't want to put any presenter right in front of the coffee, I'll be the person that you hate the most. Coffee is right outside there, and thanks to all the presenters for sticking very closely to the time. We have a good 20 minutes for some nice chatting, nice sharing around all the discussions we have just had. But before that, let me give one last shout out. All of those presenters' video, of course, except for Williams, he took on a wonderful trip and shared that with us just to make us jealous. But all of the other presenters' videos are filmed in our newly launched Studio Tips, Teaching Innovation Production Studio. If you are interested in making use of that studio to make some educational videos or maybe make videos for feedback, please reach out to our colleagues and we're happy to support you. Now it's coffee time. Enjoy.
We aim to inspire an interest in you, a sense of curiosity in you.
Star Wars idea of the guide that Luke focuses on.
As the gap between the rich and poor widens, a revolt by the underclass.
This course, University Teaching.
Research evidence on
我在此邀请你，口腔从业者、牙科学生。
Unzippable. And 3D printing in dental application.
The market crash occurred in 1987. That market crash, today, our best experts.
But also the public health actions behind the prevention and control.
Keep your hands between the waistline and the neckline.
Popular depictions of dinosaurs in their environments.
Discussing the thinking and models of Aristotle. Welcome to our place in the universe.
How gender stereotyping contributes to
doing gender and why it matters.
For the students to access the course content, and then I use that classroom.
It's about using property cryptography.
We all know that our fingerprints.
The flipped classroom is now a fairly well-known, widely used term, giving students the opportunity when they come to class to do work.
I feel that it's very engaging and it really makes students voice their opinion. You have to learn to juggle different opinions. Very stimulating.
They can also bookmark their favorite terms, export the list by email.
People around you may already be infected.
Feeling particularly bold, she's knuckles up to her when asked.
Rather than like
through the time markings on the equator form the meridian.
Led by Lembo Professor of Biomedical Engineering at its school.
Overcome the limitations of the current technologies that could provide a list of new countries.
This difficulty has negative impacts on rice growth and productivity.
步驟2，將門用力向外推開。
初級圓棍係用嚟吸收由車輪傳去嘅。
I'm done here. On to the next case.
原來一天的日常事，如何不偉大不足。
And we scientists need to make a stronger effort to explain our work and also to forge a broader appreciation of the sciences. Film and video can be a great vehicle for communicating science to the public.
We aim to inspire an interest in you, a sense of curiosity in you.
Star Wars idea of the guide that Luke focuses on.
As the gap between the rich and poor widens, a revolt by the underclass.
This course, University Teaching.
Research evidence on.
我在此邀请你，口腔从业者、牙科学生。
Untitled and 3D printing in dental application.
Market crash occurred in 1987. That market crash, today, our best experts.
But also the public health actions behind the prevention and control.
Keep your hands between the waistline and the neckline. Popular depictions of dinosaurs in their environments.
Discussing the thinking and models of Aristotle. Welcome to our place in the universe.
How gender stereotyping contributes to
Doing gender and why it matters.
Where the students access the course contents, and then I use that classroom
It's
section.
about using property cryptography.
We all know that our fingerprints.
Flipped classroom is now a fairly well-known, widely used term, giving students the opportunity when they come to class to do work.
I feel that it's very engaging and it really makes students voice their opinion. You have to learn to juggle different opinions. Very stimulating.
They can also bookmark their favorite terms, export the list by email.
People around him may already be infected.
Feeling particularly bold, she's knuckles up to him and asks,
Rather than like
Through the time markings on the equator form the marine.
Led by Lembu Professor of Biomedical Engineering at its group.
To overcome the limitations of the current technologies, and that could provide a list of new countries.
Its difficulty and negative impacts on rice growth and productivity.
步驟2，將門用力向外推開。
初級懸掛係用嚟吸收由車輪傳去嘅絕。
I'm done here. On to the next case.
原來一天的日常事，如何不偉大不足。
And we scientists need to make a stronger effort to explain our work and also to forge a broader appreciation of the sciences. Film and video can be a great vehicle for communicating science to the public.
We aim to inspire an interest in you, a sense of curiosity in you.
Star Wars idea of the guide that Luke focuses on.
As the gap between the rich and poor widens, a revolt by the underclass.
This course, University Teaching.
Research evidence on.
我在此邀请你，口腔从业者、牙科学生。
Nicol and 3D printing in dental application.
Market crash occurred in 1987. That market crash, today, our best experts.
But also the public health actions behind the prevention and control.
Keep your hands between the waistline and the neckline. Popular depictions of dinosaurs in their environments.
Discussing the thinking and models of Aristotle. Welcome to our place in the universe.
How gender stereotyping contributes
Doing gender and why it matters. Where the students access the course content, and then I use that classroom section.
It's about using property cryptography.
We all know that our fingerprints.
The flipped classroom is now a fairly well-known, widely used term, giving students the opportunity when they come to class to do work.
I feel that it's very engaging and it really makes students voice their opinion. You have to learn to juggle different opinions. Very stimulating.
They can also bookmark their favorite terms, export the list by email.
People around me may already be infected.
Feeling particularly bold, she's knuckles up to her molasses.
Rather than like
Through the time markings on the equator form the meridian.
led by Lambu Professor of Biomedical Engineering at its group.
To overcome the limitations of the current technologies, that could provide a list of new countries.
Difficulty, the negative impacts on rice growth and productivity.
步驟2，將門用力向外推開。
初級懸掛係用嚟吸收由車輪傳去轉。
I'm done here. On to the next case.
原來一天的日常事，如何不偉大不足。
And we scientists need to make a stronger effort to explain our work and also to forge a broader appreciation of the sciences. Film and video can be a great vehicle for communicating science to the public.
Okay, I know we always find the coffee break being the most meaningful and enjoyable and interactive session, but what I can guarantee is the second half of the sharing is just going to be as informative and inspiring as the first half. So before we get started with the next round of presentations, I would like to just extend another invitation on behalf of Rick and Ricky that this event is a joint effort by practitioners, by researchers, and also our colleagues in Tele. So we welcome any colleagues with any ideas on teaching and learning, on any issues that you face in your daily working interaction with students. Approach us, approach me, approach Rick or Ricky, or any colleagues you feel comfortable talking to, and we're happy to support you and to organize events or any sort of solutions to your problem together. So without further ado, let's welcome the next presenter, Professor David Pomfret from Faculty of Arts, to introduce feedback with history.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here. What a fantastic meeting. Really appreciate the invitation. I'm delighted to represent the Faculty of Arts, as others are today. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about history as feedback. And feedback, as I'm sure everyone's been making the same joke, but it can in fact be a little bit unpleasant on the ear, can't it? If we think of static. It can be indeed a little bit like human history in that it involves distortion, and if we're lucky, it may be mercifully brief. But to take a slightly less pessimistic view, feedback for students at this university hopefully is more useful than that. And as undergraduates, I guess some of us who are here today may reflect back on university feedback as perhaps a tick in red pen on a hard copy submittal, a grade, and no little confusion, actually, a fog of confusion. And indeed, that memory of my own learning history has always driven me on to try to be comparatively lavish with my own feedback to students when they hand in written work. I'm always trying to identify what they can or could have done better in quite a bit of detail, as you can see from this comment, which is just from some recent SETL qualitative feedback, most recent course I taught. And usually I provide a good couple of pages of comments for students. And that's something novel enough for them to appreciate, judging by this kind of comment on this course. Anyway, it seems fairly effective, that approach, judging by these kinds of comments and by the work the students also hand in, but it's not terribly innovative, as you can see. So I'd like to talk about something which is, I hope, slightly more innovative that's come out of a recent engagement with devising new assessments for learning, relatively new, anyway. In arts, as you probably know, our assessments challenge students to go beyond mere recall to try to present complex and ill-defined problems to engage in higher order thinking. And in the last 5 years, teachers have been really moving away from the older lecture, seminar type, tutorial-based learning activities, and they've been flipping the classroom and assessing in-class activity, and reflection on feedback for learning has followed. So in large Year 1 classes that I teach in history, I picked up on some problems that I identified in SETL and other forms of feedback, which was often that students might not perceive the relevance of lecture-based learning activities to assessment. So what's the point of attending lectures if I'm not going to be writing an essay on this topic? Is a familiar reflection. Formal feedback is also tended to be end-loaded and follow the submittal of essays towards the end of the semester. So how can we bring more formal and informal formative feedback from peers and teachers into the classroom? There was clearly potential here to help students to realize PLOs, CLOs through this means. So another point is that around about 2013 to 14, students really began to agitate for more opportunities to be heard in Hong Kong society, and that really spilled over into the classroom. I think is quite palpable. And this encouraged me to try to test out some new feedback loops in my course. So I revamped this one. It's a Year 1 history course with quite high enrollments by history standards, more than 100, entitled The Modern World. And one way of trying to enhance feedback was actually by integrating in-class written responses into the course. This is an example of that kind of thing in the class. And using them to gain familiarity with students' preconceptions. Building on this, you can actually structure the lectures around the content of their responses if this is done in the lecture before. So it's a way of amplifying peer feedback and discussing it in the classroom. And many colleagues at the university have been experimenting similar things, I believe. This is an example of the kind of peer feedback that's shared, and it's a good starting point for conversations in relation to course content. But to build in more opportunities for feedback, I also tried another thing, which was to introduce flipped large group debate-based sessions in this course in the form of immersive assessment for learning scenarios. And these I built around topic-based modules linked to major themes in world history, like empire, like war, race, gender, class, globalization, these kinds of topics that dovetail with the course spine of lectures, interactive lectures. And in those scenarios, each student in the class, is around 120 students on average, would take responsibility to play the role of one of 4 different characters in a specific historical moment. And those moments covered include, for example, as you can see here, Vietnam during the student unrest of the 1920s, but also events like the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, the American Cabinet in 1945, prior to the use of atomic technology against Japanese targets, and so on. So there's a heavy emphasis, as you can see, on social context. And the dilemmas that students face as they prepare for these scenarios are actually grounded in past real-world context. So to a significant extent, what's involved here is actually a kind of training in empathy. And what I found by introducing this was that students were quite motivated to learn the history, to do the reading, because they had the sense that they were competing, but also that they didn't want to let the side down, as it were. So preparation for these scenarios involved personalized learning using these kinds of materials. And then in class, they would work together to make choices informed by their own learning pathways. Now, they did so in order to participate not in a game as such, but a kind of counterfactual thought experiment. And preparation for those scenarios involved studying those historical texts. It eventuated in this point of common convergence, which is the plenary session in the classroom, which we termed the Great Debate. And here students would apply what they learned to try to win this debate in competition with other groups. And in the process, they'd receive formative feedback from multiple sources on their performance. And the first source is actually their peers. So they get together in a small group, first of all, and discuss how they were going to make their arguments to other groups and to the plenary session. And this, of course, would provide evidence of how effective their independent study was. Were their impressions, their arguments, convincing enough for the group to adopt them and present them to the plenary? The second source would be a TA, who you can actually see lurking in the background here, who's designated for each of the groups and will be grading their small group performance. And during timeouts, the TA could also offer guidance and feedback on their ideas. How well were they disciplining their proposals so that they would be commensurate with those contemporaries would have actually encountered or considered? The third source of feedback comes from other groups. As you can see, they're interacting here. They're actually going out and talking to each other. And then, of course, in sharing all this data, we'd actually vote on the debate motion, and this, of course, would, in effect, reflect the effective winner of the session. So there's another source of feedback there. It would also come from the teacher at the end of the session, who would actually lead a vote from the tutors and the teacher on which group had the most impressive performance, feedback on that, and finally, a discussion from the teacher on the debate outcome and how far it might have deviated from past reality, how well or not the groups performed, and how far they disciplined their contributions in accordance with the so-called facts that professional historians might agree upon. So this is, in effect, learning by doing, as you can hopefully see, and it involves a diversity of real-world contexts and practices. The feedback practices involved these 5 different sources are plural. So, picking up on this, it seemed to work very well in the classrooms. You can see that students were pretty engaged, and it actually was a lot different to the old kind of dissemination model lecture, and I thought it was well worth preserving within the course. And then I thought there'd be an opportunity to go further and tweak this a little bit and try to experiment with ways of redesigning the course to incorporate technology that might support and enhance and deepen this feedback loop. And so what I did was to design extended scenarios built around the deeper formative backstories of the characters the students would play in the scenario prior to their arriving in that immediate scenario situation. So I designed a kind of game environment in which students would navigate through detailed scenarios by selecting a character. Here's an example of the Vietnam scenario, and making choices. So the gameplay actually required students to navigate using multiple choice exercises within a system of learning pathways which are mediated by these nice visuals. And this was all done with the help of Ricky's Telly team. They were extremely helpful, and this is the product of their work. They produced these visuals. And the early scenes in each scenario, I should just try and explain how it works, actually functions as a sandbox area. Students establish their character's political stance through a series of responses. And the game then informs them of the position they've chosen. And for the rest of the scenario, they're actually graded on their ability to achieve the outcomes or objectives of that kind of character. So, for example, if their early choices result in their character being identified as reactionary by inclination, then they'd be expected to make the best possible choices within the game to achieve the kinds of outcomes that someone with reactionary leanings might have desired in that social context. So students tagged as having reactionary inclinations would score lower if they make choices and achieve outcomes that would have been likely to be sought by progressives and vice versa. You can see the feedback here, the way in which it works through machine grading. Machine assessment is based on cumulative testing through numerous different selections. This is a kind of a view into the database that's used to grade the students. And students are awarded a score for each choice so they can actually receive feedback throughout the gameplay. But feedback also occurs through the development of the plot, of course. That's very important. Students can perceive their choices to be making an impact on the context that they're working within. So what difference do their actions make? That's something important in terms of the feedback that they receive from the game, quote unquote. The third source of feedback that I designed is a recorded kind of teacher lecture, a mini coaching segment, if you will, at certain breakpoints within the game, which explain the progress of the student or the lack thereof and the quality of their choices in relation to the learning outcomes. So the aim of the game as a whole is really to try to help students to arrive ready in the classroom, better prepared with deeper knowledge of the context and the character so that we can have a better informed debate. By asking them to step into the shoes of others, we're providing with a sense of other people's past struggles in distant places and points in time. And this, of course, can be a resource for them in the present. And many of them do make that imaginative leap between the students struggling for democracy in other contexts in the past and perhaps contemporary questions or struggles that are somewhat similar. So effectively, what we're doing is placing a lot of emphasis here on choice, on turning points. And by doing so, the hope is that that would encourage them to reflect not just on their own choices, but the nature of historical change more broadly, and the role of the individual in relation to it. Their own learning journey is something that I'm also hoping that they'll reflect upon. In effect, they all kind of learn not only to analyze history, I hope, but to reflect on their own learning journey. And in a sense, this feedback becomes part of an archive that they can use to analyze that learning journey, that history of learning. Even if it's not very long, of course, at university level. These are first-year students. They haven't even declared a major yet. So this is what I meant when I came up with this title, History is Feedback. Now, I'm almost out of time, so just to very quickly wrap up, I launched a pilot of the game that you can see here on the screen in a Common Core course, class with about 90 students who participated by downloading the game in the form of an app. This is all courtesy of Ricky's Telly team. And they worked their way through one scenario and one single character as a pilot. And the feedback we got from the students was that they felt this was a useful learning experience, but they wanted it to be more immersive. They felt it was overly textual. They wanted it to be more visual. And students, of course, we know, are very visually oriented. They're very savvy consumers of this kind of game content, visual content. And so they advise us in all sorts of ways how we could go much further and be much more effective in handling the visualization of past social realities. And that's probably the next step with this project, to think about ways of doing this. So it's an ongoing project, and I'd be very interested in knowing your thoughts or hearing your reflections. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Oh, yeah. If there are any questions, I'd be delighted to try to answer. Ricky, hi.
Yeah,
you know this project.
Of course, part of this project, and I'm super enthusiastic about the pedagogy that you just briefly introduced. My specific question is, you are asking students to do this story navigating scheme, like to verify their knowledge and get feedback on the way. My question is this approach only suitable for courses that entail a narrative, so that you can build a story navigating framework?
Well, I would hope that, as with most historical narratives, that it quickly segues into analysis, so that there are stopping points within the game that would allow students to reflect and to actually analyze the choices that they've made, and to think about how change occurs in complex ways, the role of the individual in relation to context, for example. So analysis should never be far from narrative, in my view. And part of the way in which the teacher would appear in this context is to try to encourage that kind of reflection. So no, I would imagine that, yes, this could actually inform other courses at other levels of the curriculum, and that it shouldn't simply be seen as a kind of a narrative story introducing, but actually to involve students in more complex processes of thinking and critically engaging with historical content. Thanks a lot.
Hello. Thank you, David. And Ricky, sorry, I'm moving around the room and there's no strategic purpose for this movement. I'm not hiding. But I wanted to address what Ricky has just raised and what David has raised, and that is the question about narrative. Will this kind of design work only in a course in which the material is narrative in nature? I think that I think that in most courses the material may or may not have a narrative dimension, but perhaps it should. And that is because there will be an element of real-world material that should be there in any course. Every course should have that. If it doesn't, then maybe it isn't a course worth keeping. So whatever we are teaching, we should try to identify authentic elements of it and incorporate those. And if we do, and if we ask students to find them, as David is asking his students to do through history, we could do this in law, I think we can do this in psychology, in science, and education. And there is a kind of a narrative there that students can identify and create and work with. But I think it depends on incorporating that element of authenticity, which is sometimes lacking in some courses as teachers stick to the text and the material to be covered without having regard to the way it might apply in the real world, in Hong Kong, in the present and in the future. Just a thought, David, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'd be interested in your comments on that, whether you think that would help in its transferability.
Yeah, I would agree that that sounds persuasive to me. I think in the context of the history scenario, one of the challenges is, of course, building a very deep and convincingly authentic scenario, because of course we're dealing with past societies with which students are unfamiliar. Nevertheless, there should be a burden upon the designer to produce a scenario that it is historically accurate. This takes a lot of time. I think that obviously accuracy is important, whichever venue this kind of narrative would be applied to, but certainly going back over the context that we've looked at here, this is part of the way in which we kind of convince students that they're actually engaging in a more immersive experience of learning, and one which is authentic in the sense that it conforms to what professional historians would agree were social conventions. The visual representations have to be tailored to be authentic, to be accurate. So there's a strong social history dimension to this particular project, which takes a long time to flesh out, but is worth doing so, I think. Because students it helps them in the process of imagining themselves into the context when they may not be very familiar with them at all. Okay.
Thank you. Please join me and give another big round to David, and thank you for your presentation. So, apparently it's not just a good sharing of the feedback practice, it's also an excellent course design. I've been wishing to take David's course since I started working with Telly. I just haven't got the chance. I hope I still can. Our next presenter is already at the stage, Ms. Tanya Kempston from Faculty of Education, and her sharing is about the simple technique that you can use to give very timely feedback. Please, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you. It's this one, right? Yep. Okay, lovely. Right, okay. I can see that with many colleagues in relation to their excellent sharing, that there is a very rigorous process grounding a lot of the feedback practices. I would just like to share one story. This is very anecdotal. In relation to what I want to share about audio feedback, The reason that I started to use this is because, in a sense, I was forced to. I imagine that we all do an awful lot of this during the day. So if you are constantly writing and writing and writing, it's not very good for you. And I had the most dreadful tendinitis and literally couldn't write anymore. My hand was just like that. So sometimes you are forced out of your comfort zone into trying new things. And this really arose from that. What do you do if you can't write in response to whatever the piece of work is that students have given you? Okay, so I suppose what I'm asking really is how do we respond to students' work? How has that changed if we're thinking about whatever it is? We may respond to them in different ways. Quite a lot of that seems to be still in terms of writing as feedback. Now, due to time, I won't ask you to do the Mentimeter, but to try and make this more interactive today, I had prepared one to think about roughly how many pieces of assessment or of marking you do during the assessment. And listening to the colleagues from medicine and from law, we can see that if you've got a couple hundred in your class, then that very quickly stacks up, okay? I've done something like this with secondary school teachers, and of course they're constantly on a cycle of receiving work and giving it back, so that's hundreds very, very quickly, okay? So if we think about what good feedback is, it's something which focuses on what students need to learn, but we also have our capabilities and our limitations whenever it comes to response. And I think a lot of that links back to what's been discussed earlier in terms of scalability and how many students' pieces of work you can actually physically respond to in a given time. And of course, our students very reasonably want feedback sooner rather than later. But if you have going from 30, 40, 50 up to the couple of hundreds, then you have to be, I think, pragmatic about what you can do in a limited amount of time. Okay, so just from the academic literature, so what do you mean by feedback? Information about the gap between the actual level and what students have really submitted. Okay, so if we think about what Sadler says, this requires students to actively engage with feedback. I have the luxury of what seems now, after listening to colleagues from medicine and law, it seems like quite a small class, really. There are 42 in this particular master's class, which I teach. So I wanted to give feedback because I have multi-stage assessment in that particular course. So students submit 3 pieces of work, one around the middle, one about 3/4 of the way through, and then one after the course finishes, okay? So I wanted a way to get feedback to them which was efficient, which was timely, which they could respond to and help to build them up for the next piece of assessment. And if we think about feedback as sustainable, it's not just something which is plopped onto the piece of work at the very end, but it's something which really, it's chained, it's continued through the duration of a course as well as afterwards, okay? All right, so good feedback, it's sustainable, it's dialogic, it's two-way, it's getting characteristics where students can hopefully respond to whatever it is that you've said, okay? So this particular assignment that I've asked students to do, they have to write a critical evaluation of various strategies and techniques in the course, and then say how they would fine-tune those, alter those to fit into a particular pedagogical situation which they have in mind, okay? And the idea is that hopefully the evaluations they produce will be more refined as they go through the course. There is no particular evidence, I think, that feedback has to be written feedback in order to be meaningful, to be weighty, and importantly, to be sustainable and to be dialogic. So with this particular course, it's a weekly class, and there are 42 of them this year. There are no tutorials, so it's just boom, you get your 2 hours, and that's it, really. Okay? So opportunities for feedback, one-on-one is going to be, again, challenging if you don't have a lot of time. If you're teaching lots and lots of other things, which particularly colleagues in lecturer grade may be doing. Okay? So technology can be quite a useful facilitating tool. Whether you've got iPhone or Android phone, I'm sure that you all will have a voice recorder app on your phone of some sort. It kind of comes as standard, all right? So what I have been doing for a while now is to use the voice memo function on my phone. So if you look at your phone, you'll see that you've got one, okay? When I'm giving feedback, I want this to be a simple process for me as well. If you've got students whose work you want to assess and get feedback back to them in a timely fashion, okay? So I want to hopefully give them comments that will feed forward, that will, help them to do better in their course. Okay? So this, it's a mixture of the decidedly low-tech and the somewhat high-tech with the use of the voice memo function. Just going back to what a student said at the very beginning and those kind of cryptic remarks that you're not sure what they mean if your tutor has put an exclamation mark or something. What is that supposed to mean? So whenever I look at the student's work, a written piece of work, then I get out my coloured markers and whatever seem to be the most salient points that I want to address in relation to the learning outcomes. And the learning outcomes are right there, so I'll toggle between those and the piece of work all the time. Then I'll just colour code. And that gives me then something to refer back to whenever I am speaking to the voice memo, okay? It's quite easy to record yourself for 2 or 3 minutes. My office is across the corridor from David Carless, so he probably hears me talking to myself quite a lot. But I would suggest annotation at the side. So I don't mean to sound, very primary school, but color coding is one way that it's quick and easy for me to see what I want to address. And in a sense, if I have a few annotations next to that, my handwriting's really bad, I have to admit, then I can toggle between that and then the learning outcomes. It has taken me a while to get into the routine of this. Of course, you don't want to have some sort of Joycean stream of consciousness just coming out in relation to the student's work. So I found that for me, in relation to marker fatigue, 8 pieces of work at a time is enough if I'm going to record audio feedback. But I think the majority of your time would be spent in annotating the work and gathering your thoughts, and after that, then recording yourself. It's quick to record yourself. When you get into the habit of doing it, it's even faster. It becomes more efficient. I guess the point is to have the learning outcomes beside you at all times so that you really are on point with your feedback at all times. So you record yourself, and then you save this, of course. You just quickly email it to yourself, so then you've got a record if there's an audit or the external examiner wants to listen to the feedback. Then it can be emailed to the students. They get, in a sense, free listening practice. What I need to do in order to close that feedback loop is to then ask students to respond. So that's something I'm working on for this semester. So whenever they get the oral feedback from me, then they respond in maybe 2 or 3 bullet points in the next part of the assessment about what they have done to try and address my feedback in this piece of work, okay? So, of course, you need to be in a quiet environment in order to do this. That's not always easy in our university, is it? Okay. And I found it really odd to listen to myself in the beginning. And this took a bit of experimentation. I think I was concerned with sounding very proper. I think I sounded a bit like Margaret Thatcher when I started doing this. It was really weird to listen to myself. So I did have to practice in order to get a tempo and etc., a form that I was comfortable with. You do have to be careful, I think, not to repeat yourself. Hence, I found 8 at a time was the most that I could do. Otherwise, I was maybe starting to repeat myself a little bit. But with my 30 or so, I could comfortably get the 1,000-word piece of work back to them within a week. And I think they appreciated that because they were then able to take on board whatever my comments were and hopefully respond to them. And that's it. So, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, may not be a real question, but I totally agree with you on your last point about the horror experience of listening to yourself. For me, it's my horrible experience of watching myself in the video. But my question is, do you plan to generalize this to a video feedback?
Oh yes, that's kind of the next thing, because I think with a multi-screen effect, you can have the students' work, you can have the criteria set out, and then you can have yourself. So probably I will be knocking on Telly's door quite soon to get some help with that. But yes, I think there's no reason why you can't video record yourself and then, go through this process with the annotating and so forth and talk to the students. One thing I think the students have said anecdotally that they liked was that they felt more connection, more like they'd been talked to rather than just a set of feedback. There was at least a human voice, although not a human face with the audio feedback. Literally, yes.
Thank you very much. I actually like this idea too, because as you're saying, writing over and over, and then also it sounds sort of sterile, and you may be able to give a little bit more of a dynamic feedback when you're actually like looking at their work and saying, yes, that's a great point, etc. More personalized, like what you guys were just saying. My question is then, how are you uploading this? Are you emailing this voice memo, or are you?
Yes, absolutely. So I email it first of all to myself so that I have a copy of it, and then I'll just once you've saved those on your own drive, then it's just a matter of inputting students' email addresses. Or sometimes colleagues in our admin office will be very kind and do it for me. I'll just literally compress into a zip file and send it to them, and then they'll do it for me. Yeah.
Okay, and then to follow up then, in terms of, I guess, actionable, which is one of the key words that we're hearing over and over, how are the students then responding to your...
Okay, yeah. Yes, so that's something that I need to do more of, actually, I think, but in relation to the feedback that I've given, then they need to feedback to the feedback in whatever the next part of the assignment is, and because there are 3, then there are 2 more opportunities for feeding back to what's come before. Yeah. I think, that the students are doing better in that course, maybe because they've had quite a lot of feedback throughout, rather than just at the end.
Yeah, I would like to try to share a rumor. So I heard that actually on Turnitin, there's a similar function for us to record comments. But to be honest, I have never used it, so I'm just trying to
I
express some
haven't used
rumor.
it either because I really like using my phone and I'm used to it now. So I'm sure there probably is, and it'd be well worth investigating. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think I just prefer my iPhone because I'm very at home with it.
Apple fans.
We're all done. Okay, thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Tanya. And I quickly jumped out because William's question actually leads us to our next presentation. Tanya is not the only person who favors audio feedback. And next we have Mr. Philip Smyth from CAES sharing his experience of using audio feedback in Turnitin.
Thank you. Very timely. Thank you. That's led in very nicely. Actually, when I look at the title of this, I feel a bit like a fraud because Tanya's already explained a lot of things here far better than I'm about to do. I feel a bit like the comedy auctioneer where there's a Ming Dynasty vase for sale. There's having an auction, the price is going up, it gets to about a few £1 million sold, and then the next lot the auctioneer says is, here's another Ming Dynasty vase, which is probably going to go for far less. Anyway, I'm from CAES, the Centre for Applied English Studies. It's working? It's not pointing. No. That's the other one, is it? Oh, it's this one, is it? So for those who don't know CAES, our primary mission is to improve the academic literacy skills of undergraduate students. So we're obviously dealing with a lot of students writing, trying to give help and advice so that students can complete academic assignments and do their writing better. This is something that I think Tanya's already touched on, but students obviously very often are dissatisfied with feedback. And what's unusual about what I'm going to talk about is that it's probably not the case in CAES, and that doesn't mean that we're very happy that everything is all great and we shouldn't worry, but students actually rate the feedback that we give quite highly, but I think probably for the reason that, relatively speaking, we're giving more feedback than students are getting in other courses, so I don't think that's really any cause for celebration when conceived in that way. We do a lot of writing, so the issue really with our feedback here, I think, and I'm looking at this from a teacher angle mostly, but also from a student effectiveness point of view, we get students to do writing tasks. They submit drafts so they can get some feedback from us on how they're doing. Most of the teachers in CAES teach about 5 classes, about 20 students per class, so around 100 students in total. And teachers very often say they spend 30 to 40 minutes on each assignment. So up to 40 minutes. That's not everybody, but I've certainly spoken to some colleagues who spend 40 minutes on an assignment. So my back of the envelope calculations, that's about 27 hours per class, per teacher, of feedback during a semester, which is a lot of time if you've got 5 classes and you're doing this in all of the classes that you have. So I think David Carless would call this a very low leverage strategy, a lot of effort on the part of the teacher, and is it really getting the benefits and the reward in terms of what students are getting from it? If anyone wants to check my calculations, you can check those later. My maths is not very good. But, another sort of problem, apart from the teacher workload there, is obviously the teacher is doing all the work. Very often students are kind of taking a quick look at feedback and then putting it in their bag maybe, or not really getting much chance to respond to it. Students are quite passive in that. And before, when I used to give feedback, I very often track changes on Word. And what I found out from students was they just accept all the changes, resubmit the work. And so that's, again, very low leverage. I've done a lot of work, and it's seconds sometimes for you to click accept. Sorry. So to respond to the question, something I've been doing here to try and address this, to try and speed up this process, if you like, is using GradeMark in Turnitin and the audio feedback function of that. I set myself a task. Instead of 30 to 40 minutes, I was trying to do all this in 10 minutes per student. So I don't want to tell the students here how little time I'm spending. You know, the other teachers are spending 30, 40 minutes. But I felt, well, students felt there wasn't much difference here. So time being saved, but students aren't noticing very much. Those who've not used it before, you can open up Grade Mark and turn it in. You can see students' work. And if you click on the Grade Mark, there's an audio function there where you can record 3 minutes of audio feedback. There's a sort of text comments box down the side there as well that you can write in notes. So what I do is I very quickly read through the student work. And as I'm reading, I make just a few simple notes in the text comments box. Very messy, just words, things that come to me. I very quickly organize my thoughts. What are the 2 or 3 things here that I think the students, according to the criteria, are not quite getting or can improve? And maybe 1 or 2 things they're already doing very well. Just take about 30 seconds to organize my thoughts. Then I just hit the record button, record between 2 and 3 minutes. And there's an upload button. It takes about a minute to upload your comments back up. So in that 1 minute where you click the upload button, I tidy the notes into something that looks more like fully formed sentences. And so what the student gets at the end is the audio comments plus some notes down the side there in the text comments box. So I think it's quite simple to use. And I had a timer with me just to check I was really sticking to 10 minutes. Reading through, making notes is about 5 minutes. Hit the record button 2 to 3 minutes, and then 1 minute to turn the notes into sentences. Anything there that I've not just said? Just the final bit at the end. So what happens when the students get these audio feedback? Very often they're listening to it in class, put their headphones on and have a quick listen. But then I want to follow up with some sort of whole class feedback and students working together in peer groups to try and interpret that feedback, try and identify what it is in their work that they can still improve, so that later when we have a tutorial, we meet the students and we discuss the improvements they're going to make to their work. They've already been thinking about it beforehand. So I very quickly sort of surveyed the students what their views were on this. My teacher effectiveness scores were unchanged, so I don't think it directly led to students thinking good things, but they certainly were unaware that I was spending less time on feedback than I had been previously. So these are from students. There's a few, I apologize for the length of these, but I wanted to capture student comments in their entirety. I like that first one, more room to think about how we can improve. So actually listening to something, students were reflecting a little bit on what can I do. Perhaps in the written comments, perhaps that opportunity isn't always taken. You're so concerned with micro-level features, you're not thinking about a bigger picture. I really like the second one as well. It encourages discussion with the facilitator. Feels like we're talking to you. I think that's following on from what Tanya was saying. It seems like more of a dialogue. It seems like discussion is welcomed, which it was. And students also felt the pauses in the way that I was talking. I think this is an interesting thing which I've not researched very much yet, but when you're doing the 2 to 3 minutes, how do you organize those thoughts, exemplify some of what you're saying in a clear, easy to follow way? So this student, or the students, felt that I was pausing appropriately, they were able to follow what I was saying, and they were able to catch the things. And they talked about examples, and I tried to include examples, which is something you can't really do in written feedback. Point out something and then give an analogy or metaphor. It might help them understand what it is that you're talking about. And that certainly is possible in an oral form that wouldn't be possible in a written form. There were 1 or 2 concerns. So students really liked listening to it. They were able to use it straight away. These really more concerned with the longer term use of this feedback, sort of restoring and retrieving things that you've said. So it's obviously difficult. It's a 2 to 3 minute thing. You said something a couple of weeks ago and now it's making sense to me, but I can't very easily go back and find it. It's in the middle of a 3-minute audio. I have to go and play the whole thing again to remember, what did you say about my paragraphs? And the other thing, because it's in Turnitin, the student says maybe the feedback's not kept for a long time. I think sometimes the feedback gets overwritten if the assignment has changed. And so this could be a bit of an issue that I'm not quite sure how long things are stored there for. I don't know either. Maybe somebody here has got experience with it, whether you can actually download the audio comments from Turnitin keep them somewhere. I don't know if that's possible or not, but certainly what I think was very interesting from this is that students do seem to be keen to think about storing feedback, listening to it again after the event, which were quite interesting insights to me. I hadn't sort of anticipated that students would be that interested in feedback. I think it's something that I will certainly look at and try and address a bit later. So I won't say much about whole class feedback, but if we're talking about scaling up, which is a lot of what we've been talking about today, obviously audio comments, I've said, are much quicker than the written comments, but if you've got a class of 200, it's still quite time consuming. But I pair it with whole class feedback. I think there is some potential for very quickly looking at work and turn it in, or getting students to upload it on Google Docs, see what the key ideas are, and then give whole class feedback. I still feel students' work's been looked at, you can still address it, it still informs your teaching, so I think there are some potentials there for scaling up, but I like this because there's now time to do a lot more of this because of the time saved with audio feedback. I spent an hour in class doing whole class feedback and getting students to think about what they've heard, write some comments on the board, and then see if they can find in their own work what it is that they should be trying to improve. So just to quickly wrap up, I think I found the students more active and engaged, more dialogue going on. I'm certainly feeling like I'm doing less of the work, and students are taking a bit more ownership of the feedback process and developing their own work rather than the teacher doing it all for them. And I suppose an aim I'm doing here is, can I get in 2 rounds of feedback using whole class feedback, using this audio approach quicker than just how long the written comments would have taken. I'll finish it there. Any questions? I think Tanya probably answered them all already. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I actually, in a summer Common Core course this summer, got I got the students to record our tutorial conversation. I mean, thank you very much for your presentation, because I didn't really know what to do with it. But I just did. But I think apart from it means that you have a record of the conversation, and it also so that if there's a question later, oh, did you say this or you didn't say that, and then you can go back and check. I mean, both parties. But it also it slightly makes people take the conversation more seriously because they know that there's a record of it. So I don't know whether that's something that you found as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I found it necessary, but I imagine that students are thinking like that you know, this is something more personal to them. Maybe they're, I mean, like Tanya, the only person with worse handwriting than Tanya is me. Students can't read very often what I'm saying, so they're not really going to engage with it. But yeah, I'm sure that probably is the case. I certainly want to develop this idea a bit further and think a bit more about whether I need to do it through Turnitin or whether there's other channels to use. But yeah, thank you for your points.
Thank you, Philip, again. And once again, the question is leading us to the next presentation. So this time, Jessica Toh from Faculty of Education will share with us the approach to engage students in the feedback. Please, Jessica.
So good afternoon. I'm Jessica Toh from Faculty of Education. In the coming 10 minutes, I will introduce how to use 3 levels of feedback to increase Torch postgraduates' engagement. I mainly teach master courses, and nearly 75% of my students take the program on a part-time mode. So one obvious problem I observe is students' limited engagement with feedback. Usually when we talk about engagement, a common scenario in our mind is students do not collect the graded assignment at the end of the semester. That is behavioral engagement. In fact, there are two more types of engagement. A cognitive dimension, students may not be able to interpret and understand the feedback content. And emotional dimension, if students cannot benefit from the feedback, they may develop negative feelings towards feedback and the feedback givers. And these three dimensions interact with each other in shaping students' perceived usefulness of feedback. So for problem solving, I think it's important to understand the contextual factors limiting students' engagement. I think the first factor is the one-off assessment task designs, and other presenters also explain it, that is, if students are required to submit only one assignment at the end of the semester, students see no point of reading the feedback. And the second factor, lack of opportunities for dialogic feedback. Most master classes are conducted in the evening, and the classes end at 9 p.m. So for many part-time students, they want to leave the classroom at the end of the class. So usually students won't stay in the classroom to seek feedback. And furthermore, many master classes are very tight in schedule. So the teachers found it very difficult to reserve class time to have face-to-face feedback interaction. And the last factor is the prevalence of the telling mode of feedback. And this is somehow related to the teacher-student power relationships. Many students perceive teachers as a connoisseur of knowledge, so they expect teachers to tell them directly how to improve their work. So gradually, students will have a passive role in the feedback process. So in view of these constraints, a feedback strategies was developed to increase students' engagement. And this feedback strategy starts from assessment task design. So for example, for assignment 1, in the middle of the semester, the student made an oral presentation on the literature analysis of their selected topic. And this literature analysis was a part of their end-of-term written assignment. So students could build on their work in assignment 1 when they undertake the assignment 2, all right? And between the two assignments, students will be engaged in 3 layers of feedback. Layer 1 is peer feedback. Each student could receive qualitative comment from 3 peers on Moodle after the oral presentations. There was a brief explanation of the assessment criteria in class, so most students could construct feedback in relation to the criteria. And the second layer is student self-assessment. After each student receives the peer feedback, the students need to create an audio file to self-assess their performance, and then they send the file to teacher via WhatsApp or WeChat. I think this is convenient to both teachers and students. Many students are not familiar with self-assessment procedures, so they were given guidelines like this. The students were asked to discuss their strengths and weaknesses in the oral presentations, think about the reasons behind the problem, make suggestions for improvement, and at the end of the self-assessment, they could raise any questions they have for the subsequent assignment. And once teacher received their audio feedback, that would be the last layer, the third layer. That is the teacher's audio reply to self-assessment. The teachers would comment on the accuracy of the self-assessment, give some suggestions if students overlook some key problems, and answer the questions raised by the students. All right, so these are the 3 layers of feedback. I think I can have some time to let you hear part of the audio recordings. This is the student self-assessment.
Okay, so let me start from the strength of the presentation. I think the presentation was quite smooth in general, and then I've mentioned the context, and also I've done the discussion on the problems and challenges faced by in the issue from different perspectives, like classroom perspective, pedagogical, curriculum, and social perspectives. And then I've made a comparison, I've made a connection between the curriculum guide and the outcomes of the issue. So I've shown the connection between the objectives of the curriculum guide and how successful the curriculum was implemented in the context. And then there are some...
And this is the teacher's reply.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for your self-assessment. Your classmates and I share similar views on your oral presentation performance. We think that you did a great job in the oral presentations. You could describe the context and the curriculum issue very clearly, and you could analyze the curriculum issues from multiple perspectives. And it was very good of you to show us the good connections between the curriculum guide and the implementation of the NSS modules in the school. And the time management is perfect. All right. As for weaknesses, you mentioned that you are not happy with the innovation management. From my point of view, I think you could have introduced the idea of innovation much earlier.
So that's the end of the sample. Actually, students can receive the teacher's audio reply within 2 to 7 days after the production of the audio file. So usually students just need to wait for 1 week. And I use an open-ended survey and interview to find out how these strategies can increase students' engagement. And this is what I found. All right. Okay. So for behavioral engagement, the reverse mode. When I say reverse mode, that means peer feedback and self-assessment before teachers' reply, increased learner agency. Students could assume more control in the feedback process because they had to think deeply about their strengths, weaknesses, and suggestions for improvement before interacting with the teacher. For the cognitive dimension, the asynchronous mode gave students more thinking time to reflect on the peer and teacher feedback. And the last one, for the emotional dimension, Phillips talked about the social presence of teachers in his presentation. And I found another useful point, that is, the flexibility in time and space increased students' receptivity to negative feedback. In the traditional feedback practice, the students are embarrassed when the teachers point out the problem in face-to-face interaction. But now, the students are more relaxed because they can design the time and space to work on the negative comments, all right? So these are some beneficial impacts of these strategies. However, there are also some caveats. One of them is the varying acceptability of audio feedback. I think this is related to individual learning styles. Some students prefer written feedback to audio feedback. So they told me that they spend a lot of time writing a well-organized script and practice it for a few times before making the audio recording. Yeah, but I think the students are not used to the audio style. Yeah, if they get used to it, that would be very useful because according to some literature, 1 minute of audio feedback is equivalent to 6 minutes of written feedback. So it saves a lot of time, all right. And other caveats is the sequence of peer feedback and self-assessment. In these feedback strategies, peer feedback comes before self-assessment. Some students would say peer feedback gave them some input for reflection. However, there were also some students saying that peer comments influence their evaluation, all right. My point of view is if students are new to self-assessment, it's good to engage them in peer feedback first because peer could give them some ideas to stimulate their reflection. And at the same time, when they construct comments, they can develop their evaluative judgment. And they can transfer this ability to self-assess their own work. All right. Yeah. In conclusion, I have demonstrated how to use designs to increase students' engagement. And two major components are interlinked assessment tasks and use of simple technological tools, Moodle, social media apps to transcend the limitations in the traditional feedback practice. And I welcome any questions from the floor. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm a student panel representative, one of them. I think your idea of the audio feedback is very excellent, but I would like to point out more on what your return of the feedback. For example, just now you mentioned that the innovation or the technology can be put at the front part. But I would like to know more on your reason behind why you want to put it at the beginning. So this is your suggestion. I want to know your reason, then I critical analyze why you think this is better way, then I can learn more and transfer this kind of thinking into my next piece of work.
Actually, this is a part of the teacher's reply, and then the first part is how students comment on the accuracy of the peer feedback and the student self-assessment. The part you mentioned is the teacher's recommendations to the students' weaknesses, because the students say he was not happy with how to situate the innovations, and the teacher just give him some suggestions for doing it. So this is the middle part of the audio's reply. And the last part of the audio reply is the teachers find out other issues the students have overlooked. Yeah. Can I address your question?
Yes, you addressed my question, but I just give a suggestion for the teacher that they need to point out the reason behind their thinking so that the student know more reason behind.
Because this is just a sample. Because the entire file is 7 minutes. But I know I only have 10 minutes, so I just show you the first minute for it. Yeah. Thank you for your question. All right. Yeah. So any other? Yeah.
I just wondered if there's any. I mean, you have the peer first, then the self, and then the teacher.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any scope for changing. I mean, this might follow on a little bit from what you've been saying, to get the teacher comment much earlier, that students are kind of aware a bit more of what you're after, and then from there you look at peers and then maybe finish with self. I wonder if there's any scope in that kind of thing to kind of reorder things, or whether it needs to happen in the order that you've just described. I think just the point I'm making, I guess, is that if students are going to learn to monitor the quality of their own work, then maybe it's better to get the teacher comments earlier and gradually have less teacher input later as they started to learn this for themselves.
Yeah, I designed this sequence deliberately because I think they are master students, they have a lot of learning experience, so it's good for them to motivate them or push them to do self-assessment and peer assessment. So I asked them to get peer feedback, think about the performance, and then get teachers' reply so they can reduce their reliance on teachers. Yeah. But of course, there are other combinations we can explore in the future. A model of peer feedback, do you mean? Yeah, in one of the classes, before the oral presentation, I show students one sample peer feedback. So students will know, oh, they need to mention the strengths, what are the language expressions to have some hedging for the weaknesses, how to give suggestions, something like that.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. And again, all the discussion is leading to Mr. Pryor's sharing of practicing feedback in his classroom.
This one? Okay, I talked to these slides. Okay, we remember what Andrea said about talking before the break. So we're nearly at the end, so I'm in the graveyard shift. Thank you, Andrea. Also, the great advantage of speaking last is that I follow a lot of fabulous speakers already. A lot of the discussion, a lot of the really great points have already been made. So all I need to do now is just summarize. So that's an easy task for me. I just wanted to talk a little bit about practicing feedback. Many of the speakers have conceptualized feedback as a dialogue, and I think that's essential. But I think we should remember that a dialogue is not just me saying something and the student saying something back. In dialogue, we speak and we keep speaking. And we need to engineer a situation where we can keep speaking. So this communication of ideas, this exchange of ideas, We need to promote that and facilitate, create opportunities for that dialogue to go on. We need also to think about what is being communicated. Am I just assessing? Am I just affirming that the student has learned something? Am I providing additional information? Am I providing additional instruction? Am I providing some sort of commentary or some sort of provocation based on what the student has written or the student has done? Or, and this is where I take up an interest in feedback, can feedback support higher thinking, higher order thinking, higher order learning? I work in a design school. We're thinking about design. We're thinking about planning, strategizing. This all requires extensive and rapid communication. Can I build that into my feedback, the whole idea that it can become a very intensive dialogue? Ting, 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 ting. So just in summary of what everybody has said, feedback needs to be personal, needs to be tailored to the individual, needs to be positive, it needs to be open-ended. And here I emphasize the word dialogic rather than dialectic. Dialogic being this sort of a discussion that doesn't necessarily have an end. Dialectic coming to a specific point. I think it should be open. I think it should be queryable. I think the students must have an opportunity to say, I don't understand, please explain. You said this, but what if I did that? So queryable, recordable perhaps. I somewhat question how the necessity to record feedback in extensive detail. But in principle, my principal point is that feedback should be often. We should repeat it. And it should not just be a one-off thing right at the end. It should not be assumed for just big things. It should be not assumed for just assignments. We should give feedback on coursework or for activities in class. I missed a whole slide there. You'd be happy to know, unhappy to know that I've gone back to this slide. These are just a few more summary points: quick, timely, actionable, useful, relevant. Much of the feedback I read from my colleagues is not relevant. It's just feedback for feedback's sake, just to demonstrate that they have done feedback. It should be manageable. You know, don't give huge amounts of feedback. Students tell me that they only read about half the feedback. They like to know that they've got feedback, but they don't tend to action it very much. It should be flexible. We should not just rely on written feedback, verbal feedback. Particularly in design, we do a lot of drawing feedback. And it should be associated with the particular learning environment. If I'm working outside, then I need to give my feedback outside. Excuse me. And also, we should be thinking about the singular and the multiple. Can I give feedback to many students? Can many instructors give feedback to an individual student? Please remember that the teacher's experience of class is talking to a large group. The student's experience of a class is just a one-on-one. It's a singular experience. They don't have the same environmental experience as the teacher. Okay, skip on. I started teaching in Architectural Studio, and I rely very heavily on my experience in Architectural Studio in terms of feedback. These are just photographs from my landscape studio, complete mess, everything everywhere. The students organize the space. It's a very active, intensive place. And this is instructors giving feedback. It's very difficult often to identify who the instructor is in class, because they are sitting next to the student, surrounded by students, talking directly to students. When the student has prepared a design, we sit down with them and we start drawing on their designs. We start working with them. There's this very close collaboration, and it's a very intense conversation. Why did you do this? Did you consider that? Could you have done this another way? And the student responds immediately. They can ask questions. Okay, the instruction in studio is very intensive and is super expensive. It's 4 times more expensive than instruction in class. So maybe this is just for architecture. And this is the other part of studio teaching, the design reviews. Here's my student Stanley trying to explain his design to 4 invited reviewers. Some are colleagues, some are outside practitioners. He has to explain it. They ask questions, they give their response, they try and develop a discussion. This is a very central process and happens many times during the semester. But it's a core element of feedback because it's immediate, it's direct, it's personal, it's queryable. Everything about it is strong. And that's why Architectural School here in Hong Kong U, one of the top 10 in the world. We produce very, very good students, but it's at a very high cost. Okay, I'm thinking, what can I take away from this? Okay, a few more photographs of what's happening, and you can see the studio space that we're using is very flexible, very open. Anybody can join this discussion. It's not just about me and the student. Any other student, anybody, any other colleague can come in and contribute to the discussion. You see me there in the bottom left-hand corner. There may be many people, many students and instructors involved in the same dialogic interchange, giving feedback on a student's work. And you see the top photograph, there's actually 3 reviews going on in parallel, so it can get a bit noisy. And sometimes we put this out in the field. These are students presenting exactly the same work to the district council in Kwon Tong. We ask them to do this so that they understand how the community might respond to their work, but also to get feedback from non-professionals, people who are not directly related to their work. Can they understand from that something special? My colleague Max giving feedback in the field. Students are working in the field, out in the field, he's giving feedback in the field at the time that the students are doing the work, not taking it away and writing a comment in his room and sending it back to them, to their room. This is a personal dialogue. And this, another exercise, this is in Yangon, where we're getting our students to give feedback on local students, a little design exercise that we gave them all so that our students learn how to give feedback to other students, an important element. My question was, can I take any of that into a large-scale class? I teach a Common Core class, 100 students. I teach it as a flipped class. I follow Professor Pomfret. Where did he go? Oh, right in front of me. David, sorry. I took inspiration from him. I flipped this class. It's a blended classroom. I run it as a workshop. And here we're giving feedback. And the class is almost entirely feedback. The students work in groups. They do lots and lots and lots of small coursework exercises. They may be doing 20, 30 different pieces of coursework, all of which get some form of verbal feedback. And because I'm going around the class, I spend my entire time going around the class, working with them, giving them feedback, not necessarily at the end, but as they're doing the work. I'm talking to this group, but the next group is also overhearing. They heard what these guys said, and they pass it on to the next guys. There's this continuous discussion. 100 students, me in a class, I have a meaningful discussion with each group every session. And I have a couple of TAs, you can see one of my TAs, Julian, down at the bottom here, adding to that discussion, keeping it going. It's very intense, but it seems to work. We also have the gallery reviews. I say to the students, you do your work, you put it on the wall, you explain to each other. You comment on each other's work, you review each other's work. We've been through the marking rubrics, the grade descriptors. They know what I'm looking for. They are continuously feeding back to each other. So if anybody has any questions, they're not having to wait for me to write something to answer that question. We're all there in class. And it's a very lively, very interesting experience. Last slide. I spend quite a lot of time in class giving feedback. I think this is a demonstration, a personal demonstration. I am feeding back in front of the students. I sit with them, I take their work, and I mark it up in front of them so that they can see how I'm doing that. They can ask, why did you write this? Well, what about this paragraph? You haven't said anything on this paragraph. You've underlined this bit. What does it mean? And I tell you what underlining means is I'm trying to think of something to say on their work. We all do that. Okay, this seemed like important, but I can't tell you why it's important. Much easier if we're having a conversation, a two-way conversation, rather than I'm stuck in my room trying to think of something to say. I suffer exactly the same, the sort of wrist problems of running out of energy and I try and type it all and I try and copy and paste. If you're having a conversation with a colleague, if you're trying to communicate something with a colleague, you send them an email. They send you an email back. You send them an email. It doesn't take very long before one of you gets bored and gets up and goes around to their office so you can have that conversation in person and you can get a lot more done. And I think, hopefully I'm working towards getting that sort of approach in my class. Thank you very much. Excellent. No questions at all except for, oh gosh.
Sorry, I do have a question. It's not really a question to you. It's actually because it comes to my mind that like architecture or fine art, in this kind of teaching, is very different from other faculty. Let's say students need to walk into the hall to do exam. So students would expect so-called, would you tell me I'm doing the right or, which part I did it wrong? But for this kind of subjects, I would call it very subjective on a certain extent. And I'm sure that probably you experience that you and your colleague might have very different opinion towards, one piece of work. So in that regard, this kind of exchange or interchangeable, ideas or concepts floating around between you and the student and also between the colleagues or between student to students, how are you going to so-called accommodate this kind of I would say co-create type of feedback to the students? And I'm sure the student might have some kind of opinion regarding, I do not agree with you, but I do agree with another professor on that regard. So would you mind to share a little bit?
Absolutely right, which is why we have these studio reviews with many people involved, so that we can have multiple voices. In architecture, there are no right answers, there are better solutions, but I judge the better solutions are better argued for. There's a clearer rationale for why I did that, or why I have proposed this solution. And we test students against many different opinions. They can pick and choose and say, oh, I like this answer, but they need to answer everybody's question, which is why we've developed this review format, this studio teaching format, and we teach in multiple teams. So you have many different groups working within the same space, simply to respond to that. So from that point of view, humanities, it's about argumentation. So I would imagine in science, maybe you have where you have more sort of formulas and right and wrong answers, maybe you don't need so much of this. But wherever you have that argumentation, I think having instructional design that allows for multiple voices, multiple opportunities for those conversations, very important. David.
Amazing feedback, Rich. I'm just wondering if you utilize voices from past iterations of the same course when coming into offerings. Put them in conversation with students who are in the course of current cohort. So, for example, this could take exemplary work or maybe perhaps some processes. But I just wonder if that's also a resource in terms of feedback from previous.
Absolutely. You'll go back to this photograph. I have 6 different years of students in the same room. So if a student is asking a basic question, I'll say, go and ask one of the second years. You go and learn from each other. Or I will say, let's go and grab somebody from the master's course to come and tell us why this is wrong. To get that sort of vertical integration, the vertical discussion, get students to talk across year groups. And I was very fortunate to be allowed to design this room just as one big continuous room with 6 different year groups working at the same time in the same space and having to sort of feed off each other. Because we know from the research that 60% of what architectural students learn, they learn from each other. 40% comes from the instructors, which rather calls into question why we have instructors. They can learn from each other. But yes, so it's a super valuable resource. Okay. As usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mathew. with Mathew finishing up his presentation, and that's the end of all the presentations. I hope you agree with me that all of the presenters today have shared something that is, quoting back to Ricky, actionable with accountability and leads to advancement of learning. So please join me and give another round to all of our wonderful presenters today. And lastly, let's invite Professor Carless back on the stage again to give us a closing remark to help us summarize this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess many of you are hungry, so I will restrict my comments to 1 minute, and I will just make 2 points. The first issue I'd like to try and provoke a little bit of thinking on is scalability. I think that was a theme that went through a lot of the sharings. A wise guru once said that feedback should be more work for the student than it is for the teacher. Now, I think that's difficult, but I think that should be our aspiration, that our feedback processes should involve the students doing a bit more thinking and reflecting and acting than the time it took us to do the feedback. And I think that's taking a sort of student-centered and student action kind of theme that we've been addressing. The second sort of little provocation I'd like to end with is we're all learners in this room. We're all learners. So I'd like to advance the idea of feedback literacy. In other words, the capacities, the attitudes, and the dispositions to seek feedback. As teachers, we should be seeking feedback. As learners, we should be seeking feedback, making sense of the feedback, processing it, and then trying to use the feedback to enhance whatever work we're doing, whether it's our teaching or our academic work. So those are 2 little things I'd just like to end on. The scalability dimension, can we get the students to do more? And the feedback literacy, seeking feedback, making sense of feedback and using it. But it's been a great morning. Thanks to Rick for sort of initiating it. Thanks to Andrea and Telly for all the organizing. And thank you very much to everybody who's presented and joined us today. I think it's been a fantastic event. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Professor Carless, and thank you everyone for joining us. The event is live streamed and also fully recorded. We'll make the link available and send everyone a link afterwards. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much again for coming.